The wind didn't howl in Hecla, Montana. It screamed. Clara Whitmore pressed her gloved hands against the stagecoach window, watching the world dissolve into white chaos. The glass rattled in its frame, threatening to shatter with each gust that slammed against the struggling vehicle. She'd been traveling for 9 days, and this godforsaken corner of hell frozen over, was supposed to be her salvation. Behind her, somewhere in the blur of snow and distance, lay Philadelphia. Lay debts her dead father had accumulated like a man collecting stamps. Lay a brownstone being picked apart by creditors. Lay Harold Pemberton, her father's former business partner, who'd made it abundantly clear that there were alternative arrangements she could make to settle what was owed. The memory of his hand on her waist made her stomach turn even now. "End of the line, miss." The driver's voice cut through her thoughts, muffled by the wind and the wool scarf wrapped around his face. "Town's just ahead, or what passes for one out here." Clara gathered her carpetbag, pitifully light, containing almost everything she owned now, and stepped down into knee-deep snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath. Her traveling dress, sturdy wool that had seemed so practical in Philadelphia, might as well have been tissue paper. Hecla wasn't much to look at. A single muddy street lined with wooden buildings that leaned into the wind like drunkards. A general store. A saloon with broken shutters banging in the gale. What might have been a church, though the cross on top hung at an angle that suggested nobody'd bothered to fix it in months. Maybe years. And standing in the middle of it all, a man. Tall. That was Clara's first thought. Tall and still as a fence post, like the wind was just another detail he'd stopped noticing. He wore a heavy coat, dark against the white, and even from a distance she could see the glint of metal at his hip. The marshal's star. Had to be. Ethan Hale. The man she'd agreed to marry through an exchange of exactly 4 letters. The stagecoach pulled away behind her, the driver apparently unconcerned with niceties like introductions. Clara forced her legs to move, each step sinking into snow that hadn't been cleared because there was no point. Another storm would bury it again within hours. He didn't move toward her, just watched her struggle through the drifts like he was examining a horse at auction, trying to decide if she'd make it through the winter. "Miss Whitmore." His voice was rough, unused to unnecessary words. Not unkind, but not warm either. Neutral as the gray sky overhead. "Marshall Hale." Clara stopped a few feet away, close enough to see his face now. Hard lines around his mouth, eyes the color of slate, just as unreadable. Maybe 40, maybe less. Hard living aged people out here. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, pale against weathered skin. He wasn't handsome, not in the way the men back east tried to be with their pomaded hair and careful grooming, but there was something solid about him, something that suggested he'd still be standing when everything else had blown away. "You're smaller than I expected." Clara felt her spine straighten. "I assure you I'm fully grown." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, maybe, or irritation, hard to tell. Wasn't criticizing, just observing. Out here, size matters, strength matters. Winter doesn't care about your feelings. "I'm aware of that, Marshall. I didn't come here expecting sympathy." "Good." He turned, expecting her to follow. "Because you won't find much of it." They walked, or rather, he walked, and she fought through the snow behind him, toward a building that looked slightly less likely to collapse than its neighbors. The sign above the door read "Marshall" in faded letters. Inside, a pot-belly stove pumped out heat that felt like absolution. Clara stood near it, letting the warmth seep into her frozen bones, while Ethan closed the door against the wind. "Storm's getting worse," he said, moving to the stove to add more wood. "Reverend Thompson was supposed to be here, but he won't make it through this. Won't let up until tomorrow, maybe the day after." Oh. Clara hadn't thought about the actual wedding ceremony. Hadn't let herself think about much beyond getting here, surviving the journey. "So we'll wait?" "We'll wait." He didn't look at her, just kept feeding the fire. "There's a room upstairs, small, but it's got a bed and a lock on the door. You'll stay there tonight." The lock. He meant she could lock him out. The realization made something tight in Clara's chest loosen slightly. "Thank you." "Don't thank me for basic decency." He finally turned to face her, and she got her first good look at him in proper light. Tired eyes, the kind of tired that sleep didn't fix. Look, Miss Whitmore. Clara, if we're going to... She gestured vaguely between them. You should call me Clara. Clara. He said it like he was testing the weight of it. I'm not going to lie to you and say this is going to be easy. I need a wife because this town needs stability. Needs to see their marshal has roots, isn't going to disappear when things get hard. And things get hard out here more often than not. I understand. Do you? He took a step closer, and Clara fought the urge to back away. Not because she was frightened, though maybe she should have been, but because backing away felt like giving ground, and she'd given enough ground in her life. Because I'm not talking about hard like missing afternoon tea or dealing with difficult servants. I'm talking about winters where the snow buries everything and people starve. Summers where the heat cracks the ground and the wells run dry. I'm talking about men who left their humanity somewhere east and think the frontier means they can do whatever they want. I didn't come here expecting comfort, Marshal Hale. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but Clara didn't take them back. My father died owing money to men who weren't interested in patience. I had a choice. Marry a man who thought my debt made me property, or find another option. This was the other option. Something shifted in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Fair enough. And I won't be a burden to you. Clara set her carpetbag down, stood as straight as her 5'4" frame allowed. I can work. I can learn. I grew up in a city, yes, but I'm not some delicate flower that wilts at the first sign of difficulty. We'll see. He moved to a desk in the corner, pulled out a bottle and 2 glasses, poured amber liquid into both, handed her one. To new beginnings, I suppose. However they come about. Clara took the glass. Whiskey, probably. She'd never had whiskey. To new beginnings. It burned going down, made her eyes water. Ethan's mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. You'll need tougher skin than that. Then I'll grow it. The wind rattled the windows. Somewhere outside, something crashed. Wood splintering, metal clanging. Ethan didn't even flinch, just glanced toward the sound with the mild interest of someone noting a passing cloud. Town's falling apart, he said, reading her expression. Not enough work. Mining company pulled out 6 months ago, left about 40 men with nothing to do and no way to leave before winter set in. Some of them have been causing problems. What kind of problems? The kind that requires a marshal. He finished his whiskey, set the glass down with a decisive click. I'll show you upstairs. Get some rest. We'll figure out the rest when the storm breaks. The room was small, like he'd said. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window that looked out onto the white chaos beyond. But it was clean, and the blankets looked heavy, and when Clara tested the lock, it held firm. She sat on the bed, still wearing her coat because the room was cold despite the stove downstairs, and finally let herself feel the weight of what she'd done. 9 days ago, she'd been Clara Whitmore of Philadelphia. Not wealthy, but respectable. A woman with prospects, however narrow they might have been. Now she was Clara Whitmore of Hecla, Montana. Soon to be Clara Hale. Wife to a stranger. Resident of a dying town in the middle of nowhere. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something else. Something that might have been relief, or might have been the first stirring of hope. Because whatever happened next, it was hers to face. Not her father's debts, not Harold Pemberton's expectations. Hers. The storm howled its approval. She must have slept, because when Clara opened her eyes, the quality of light through the window had changed. Still white, still snowing, but different somehow. Dawn, maybe, or whatever passed for it in a blizzard. Downstairs, she could hear movement. The clink of metal on metal. Low voices. Clara splashed icy water from the washstand onto her face, tried to do something with her hair that had come loose during the journey. She'd worn it in a practical bun, but strands kept escaping, curling around her face. Finally, she gave up and headed downstairs. Ethan stood by the stove, cooking something in a cast-iron pan. The smell made Clara's stomach clench. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. The stagecoach stops had offered food, but her nervous stomach had refused most of it. Coffee's on the table, Shell, he said without turning around. Bread's probably stale, but it's edible. Thank you. Clara poured herself coffee from a battered pot, added a splash of milk from a small pitcher. The bread was indeed stale, but she tore off a piece and ate it anyway. Is the Reverend able to get through yet? No, maybe by tonight if we're lucky. He slid eggs onto 2 plates, brought them to the table, sat across from her. You can still change your mind. Stagecoach will run again once the storm clears. I'll pay your fare back to... No. Clara cut him off. I'm not going back. Not back to Philadelphia, I mean, but somewhere else. Denver's not too far, or Salt Lake City. Bigger towns, more opportunities for a woman on her own. A woman on her own. Clara set down her coffee cup, met his gaze directly. Let's be honest about what that means, Marshall. A woman on her own with no family, no money, and no prospects. I know what opportunities exist for women like that in cities. I'd rather take my chances here. He studied her for a long moment. You're not what I expected either. What did you expect? Someone more afraid, I suppose. Most people who come out here from back east, they spend the first month looking like scared rabbits. I'm afraid, Clara admitted. I'm terrified. But I'm also tired of running, and I'm tired of being afraid. So I'm choosing to be afraid here, where at least it's honest fear about honest things. Weather and survival, not social ruin and debt collectors. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. Eat your eggs. You'll need your strength. They ate in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Just 2 people sharing a meal while a blizzard tried to tear the world apart outside. Clara found herself studying him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way his hands moved, economical and certain. The way he listened to sounds she couldn't even distinguish. The creak of wood, the pattern of wind against different buildings. You were a soldier, she said suddenly. Not a question. He looked up, surprised. What makes you say that? The way you sit, the way you listen. My father had a friend who'd been in the war. He had the same awareness, like he was always tracking every detail. Cavalry, Wyoming territory mostly, before the war ended. Then I stayed out here. He pushed his empty plate away. Couldn't imagine going back east. Too many people, too much noise. Out here, at least you know where you stand. And where do you stand? Between the town and everything trying to destroy it. Weather, desperation, sometimes each other. He stood, carried the plates to a wash basin. Which brings me to something we need to discuss. Clara's stomach tightened. All right. The men I mentioned, the miners who stayed behind when the company left. Ethan dried his hands on a cloth, turned to face her. They've been stealing, food mostly, supplies, breaking into houses when people are away. Nothing violent yet, but it's escalating. Can't you arrest them? I could. I have. But then what? We don't have a proper jail, just a cell in the back that barely holds 1 person. And even if I could lock them all up, they'd starve, or freeze, or both. Whole town would starve, actually, because we need every able body we've got to make it through winter. Clara frowned. So you're asking me if it's all right to let criminals go unpunished? Because I don't see how I have any say in that. I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you how things are, so you know what you're walking into. He leaned against the wash basin, arms crossed. Town's divided about it. Some people want me to hang every man who's stolen so much as a potato. Others think I should look the other way because they understand desperation. And I'm stuck in the middle trying to keep everyone alive and keep some semblance of law. What do you think should happen? I think the law isn't much use to people who are starving. But I also think once you start making exceptions, the law means nothing. He rubbed a hand over his face, suddenly looking exhausted. I think I'm tired of making impossible choices. But that's all this job is. Impossible choices and people angry about whichever one you make. Clara stood, walked to the window. The snow had lessened slightly, enough that she could see the outline of buildings across the street. A figure moved between them, hunched against the cold. Someone else trying to survive another day. In Philadelphia, she said slowly, when my father's business started failing, he had employees, good people who'd worked for him for years. He couldn't pay them, but he couldn't let them go either because they had families and jobs were scarce, so he made a deal with them. What kind of deal? He gave them shares in the company. Not much, but enough that they had stake in its survival. They worked harder because it was theirs now, not just his. Some of them even took pay cuts voluntarily because they believed if they could just hold on long enough, it would turn around. Did it? No, but that wasn't the point. Clara turned to face him. The point is that people will do things for ownership they won't do for wages. They'll sacrifice for something they believe they're building together. Ethan's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting I give the thieves a stake in the town? I'm suggesting that maybe the problem isn't just that they're stealing. Maybe the problem is that they don't belong to anything anymore. The mining company left. They're stuck here, but it's not their town. They're just waiting to die or leave, whichever comes first. People without hope do desperate things. So what, I deputize them? Give them badges and hope they don't shoot me in the back? No, but maybe you give them work, real work. Something that needs doing that helps everyone, not just them. And you make it clear that they're earning their place here. Not as charity, but as members of the community. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. The north wall of the church collapsed in the last storm. Needs rebuilding before the next one hits or the whole structure will come down. And the schoolhouse? We don't have one. Kids are being taught in people's houses when they're taught at all. There you go. Clara felt a strange flutter of excitement. This was the first time since her father died that someone had actually listened to her ideas. Put them to work rebuilding the church, building a proper schoolhouse, pay them in food and shelter, but also in belonging. Make them part of something. And if they refuse? If they'd rather keep stealing? Then you arrest them, but you've given them a choice, which is more than they have now, and the town sees you trying to solve the problem instead of just punishing it. Ethan stared at her like she'd grown a second head. You've been here less than a day and you're already trying to reform my town? I'm not trying to reform anything. I'm just suggesting that sometimes the solution to a problem isn't to fight harder. Sometimes it's to change the question. Clara felt her cheeks flush. But I'm sorry, I'm overstepping. This isn't my place. No. He said it firmly enough that she looked up, startled. No, it's not a bad idea. It's actually smart. I just wasn't expecting it from a mail-order bride who barely survived the stagecoach ride. From anyone. He pushed off from the wash basin, stood straighter. Everyone in this town has been telling me to either crack down harder or give up entirely. Nobody's suggested a middle path. Maybe they're too close to it. Sometimes it takes an outsider to see things differently. Maybe. He moved to the window, stood beside her looking out at the town, close enough that Clara could feel the warmth from his body, though he was careful not to touch her. If I do this, if I try your idea, and it fails, it's not just my authority that collapses. It's everything. The town's already barely holding together. If people think I've gone soft or that I can't control things, then we'll deal with that if it happens. The "we" slipped out before Clara could stop it, but she didn't take it back. But if you keep doing what you've been doing, you already know how it ends. Sometimes you have to gamble. I'm not much of a gambling man. Neither was I. But I got on that stagecoach, didn't I? He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but recognition. The way soldiers recognized each other, her father's friend had once told her. People who'd seen the same battles. All right, Ethan said finally. When the storm breaks, we'll try it your way. But this is on both of us now. You understand that? I understand. Good. He stepped back and Clara felt the absence of his warmth like a physical thing. I need to check on a few people. Make sure nobody's frozen to death in their homes. You should stay inside, stay warm. There's more wood by the stove if you need it. I could come with you, help, if someone needs it. No, not yet. You don't know the town, and I don't need to worry about you getting lost in a whiteout on top of everything else. He grabbed his coat from a hook by the door. There's books on the shelf if you're bored. Most of them are pretty dull, legal texts and territorial law, but there's a few novels mixed in. And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a solid thunk, leaving Clara alone in the marshal's office with the wind and the fire and the strange, settling feeling that she'd just committed to something far bigger than a marriage of convenience. The storm finally broke on the third day. Clara had spent the intervening time reading. Ethan had been right about the legal texts being dull. Organizing the chaotic mess of his office. The man had no filing system whatsoever. and learning the rhythm of the town by sound. The saloon was loudest at night. The general store had a bell that rang whenever someone entered. Arguments erupted with surprising regularity, voices carrying on the wind, though they usually died down before they escalated to actual violence. Ethan came and went like a ghost. He brought her meals, checked that she had everything she needed, but he didn't talk much. Clara got the sense he wasn't used to sharing his space with anyone, and didn't quite know what to do with her presence. She didn't push. They were still strangers, after all. The wedding was just a formality to come. On the morning of the third day, Clara woke to silence. Real silence. Not the muffled quiet of heavy snow, but actual absence of wind. She got up, went to the window, and saw a clear sky for the first time since arriving. Pale blue, washed out, but there. And the sun, weak but present. Downstairs, Ethan was already dressed, already moving. "Reverend Thompson will be here within the hour," he said when he saw her. "If you want to change, or prepare, or whatever women do." Clara looked down at herself. She'd been wearing the same traveling dress for 3 days. It was wrinkled and probably didn't smell great, though the cold had kept things from getting too bad. Her trunk, the one containing her few other dresses, was still at the stagecoach depot, assuming it had survived. "I'll make do," she said. "Right." Ethan looked uncomfortable. "I should tell you there'll be witnesses. The Reverend requires at least 2. I asked Martha Jenkins and her husband. They run the general store. Good people. They won't judge." "Judge what?" "The situation. Our situation." He cleared his throat. "Not everyone understands why a man would send for a bride instead of courting properly, and not everyone will be kind about it." "I don't need kindness. I need a future." Clara smoothed her dress as best she could. "Let them judge. I stopped caring what people thought when I watched creditors carry my mother's silver out the front door." Ethan almost smiled again, that almost smile that suggested he wasn't used to the expression. "You're tougher than you look." "I keep telling you that." Reverend Thompson arrived with Martha and Samuel Jenkins in tow. The Reverend was older than Clara expected, thin and weathered like everything else in this town. The Jenkinses were middle-aged, sturdy-looking, with the kind of faces that suggested they'd seen everything and weren't easily shocked. "Marshall," Reverend Thompson said, brushing snow from his coat. "Miss Whitmore, shall we proceed?" The ceremony was brief. Perfunctory, really. Clara had been to weddings back east, elaborate affairs with flowers and music and tears. This was nothing like that. This was a contract being formalized, witnessed, made legal. She said the words she was supposed to say. Ethan said his. The Reverend pronounced them married. And that was it. Clara was now Clara Hale. "Congratulations," Martha Jenkins said, and she sounded sincere. "I hope you'll both be very happy." "Thank you," Clara managed. Samuel shook Ethan's hand, clapped him on the shoulder. "About time you settled down, Marshall. Town needs to see you're here to stay." After they left, Clara and Ethan stood in the suddenly quiet office, married and alone. "So," Ethan said finally. "So," Clara echoed. "I should tell you, I'll keep sleeping down here. The upstairs room is yours. I don't expect that... this is a practical arrangement. I won't... I understand." Clara cut him off before he could make himself more uncomfortable. "Thank you for being clear about that." He nodded, looking relieved. "Right. Good. I need to go talk to the miners. About the work. Your idea. Do you want me to come?" "No. Better if I handle this alone first. If it goes badly..." He trailed off. "If it goes badly, we'll figure it out together," Clara said firmly. "That's how marriage works, isn't it? Even practical ones." Something flickered in his eyes. "I suppose it is." Us. Ethan didn't come back until well after dark. Clara had been pacing the office, jumping at every sound, imagining every terrible outcome. The miners refusing and starting a riot. Ethan getting hurt trying to maintain order, the whole town turning against them. When the door finally opened, she spun around, heart pounding. He looked tired, more tired than usual, which was saying something. But he wasn't bleeding, and he wasn't scowling, so that was something. "How did it go?" Clara asked. Ethan took off his coat, hung it carefully on its hook. moved to the stove and poured himself coffee from the pot that had probably been sitting there for hours. Drank it in silence while Clara waited, hands clenched in her skirt. They agreed, he said, finally. Clara felt her knees go weak with relief. They did? Most of them. A few pushed back, said they didn't need charity, but the rest shouted them down. Turns out they've been going a little crazy with nothing to do. Men who spend their lives working don't handle idleness well. He set down his cup. We start on the church tomorrow. I told them the terms. Work for food and shelter, same as everyone else is doing to survive the winter. No stealing, no fighting, no causing problems. They break the rules, they're out. And they understood? They understood. Whether they'll follow through is another question. He finally looked at her properly. This was your idea. If it falls apart, it's your name on it too. I know. You don't, not really, but you will. He rubbed his eyes. Samuel Jenkins offered us his daughter's old room. She married last spring, moved to Denver. Says it's bigger than what we've got here, and it's not right for a married couple to live in a marshal's office. Oh, Clara hadn't thought about that. Do you want to? No, I told him we'd stay here. This is where I need to be, especially now. I need to be visible, available. Can't do that from a room above the general store. All right. They stood there, two married strangers in a small office, while the fire crackled and the town settled into uneasy sleep around them. Clara, Ethan said quietly. Yes? Thank you for the idea, for being willing to stake your reputation on it. We're married now. Your reputation is my reputation. Might as well try to make it a good one. He looked at her for a long moment, and Clara wondered what he saw. Probably still a city woman out of her depth. Probably still someone he wasn't sure would make it through the winter. But maybe, just maybe, something else too. Get some sleep, he said finally. Tomorrow's going to be long. Clara climbed the stairs to her room. Her room, not theirs. A detail that should have bothered her, but mostly just felt like breathing room. She changed into her nightgown, washed her face with cold water, and crawled under the heavy blankets. Through the floorboards, she could hear Ethan moving around below. The scrape of a chair, the rustle of papers, the quiet sounds of a man settling in for another night alone. She'd married him. Clara Hale now, the marshal's wife. It didn't feel real yet. But tomorrow, when the miners started work on the church, when the whole town watched to see if the new marshal's wife had made a fool of herself or found a solution, tomorrow it would start to feel real. Tomorrow, Clara would find out if she'd gambled right. She fell asleep to the sound of wind returning, softer this time, like the land testing to see if they were ready for the next storm. The church work started with 43 men standing in knee-deep snow, staring at a collapsed wall and a pile of lumber that looked more rotten than useful. Clara watched from the window of the marshal's office, unable to stay away despite Ethan's suggestion that she keep her distance. This was her idea. If it failed, she needed to see it fail. Ethan stood in front of the men, shoulders squared, every inch the lawman. Claire could see his breath in the cold air as he spoke, though she couldn't hear the words from this distance. Whatever he said, it got them moving. Men dispersed, some toward the lumber pile, others starting to clear the collapsed wall. Within an hour, there was a rhythm to it. The ring of hammers, the rasp of saws. Shouts back and forth. Instructions, corrections, the occasional curse when someone dropped something or hit their thumb. It looked like work. Real work. The kind that built things instead of tearing them down. Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. A knock at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Martha Jenkins, holding a basket covered with a cloth. "Mrs. Hale," Martha said, and Clara had to remind herself that was her now. "I brought you some bread, fresh this morning. Thought you might need something decent to eat, given the marshal's cooking." "That's very kind of you. Please, come in." Martha stepped inside, her sharp eyes taking in the organized office, the made bed Clara had folded up in the corner, the general air of someone trying to make a life in an impossible space. "You've been cleaning," she observed. "I needed something to do." Clara took the basket, set it on the table. The smell of fresh bread made her mouth water. "And the marshal's filing system needed work." Martha laughed. "That's one way to put it. Samuel says Ethan organizes by throwing everything in piles and hoping for the best." It's not quite that bad. There's some logic to it. You just have to know where to look. And you figured it out in 3 days? I had a lot of time to kill. Clara poured coffee, offered a cup to Martha, who accepted. Thank you for witnessing the ceremony. I know it must have seemed strange. Strange? Martha sat at the table, folded her hands around the warm cup. Honey, nothing's strange out here anymore. Half the marriages in this town started as arrangements. People do what they need to do to survive. Still nothing. Martha's gaze was direct but not unkind. You're here. You married him. You're already working on fixing the town's problems. That's more than most folks do their first week. I don't know if I'm fixing anything. I might be making things worse. You might be, but at least you're trying. That's what matters. Martha took a sip of coffee. The men working on the church? That was your idea? How did you eat? Small town. Word spreads, especially when it's something interesting. Martha set down her cup. Some people are saying Ethan's gone soft, letting criminals work instead of hanging them. Claire's stomach sank. And what do you think? I think hanging starving men for stealing food is a good way to become the kind of place nobody wants to live. And I think your husband has been carrying the weight of this town alone for too long. If you can help him carry it, I don't care if the idea came from you or from the wind. It's a good idea. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me if it works. Martha stood, gathering her shawl. And Clara? May I call you Clara? Please. Clara, you're going to hear things about your husband, about this marriage, about you. Some of it will be cruel. Some of it will be stupid. All of it will be designed to test whether you're strong enough to belong here. Martha's expression was serious now. The frontier doesn't care about your feelings, and neither do the people who survive it. You need to decide right now if you're going to let that break you or make you harder. I've already decided, Clara said quietly. I didn't come here to break. Good. Martha smiled then, warm and genuine. Then you might just make it. After she left, Clara stood at the window again, watching the men work. The church wall was already starting to take shape, rough, uneven, but standing. Progress. Ethan walked among the workers, checking measurements, offering suggestions. He moved with purpose, confidence. This was his element, not the office, not the careful politics of town management, but this. Physical work, clear problems with clear solutions. As if sensing her watching, he looked up. Their eyes met across the distance. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just held her gaze for a moment before returning to work. But it was enough. Whatever this marriage was, whatever it might become, they were in it together now, partners in survival, if nothing else. Clara turned away from the window and picked up the bread Martha had brought, cut a thick slice, ate it slowly, savoring the simple goodness of it. Tomorrow, there would be more challenges, more tests, more reasons for people to doubt her, to doubt them both. But today, the church wall was rising. Today, that was enough. The work continued through the week. The church wall went up, solid and true. The men settled into a rhythm, work during daylight hours, take meals together in shifts, sleep in the church basement where it was warmer than most of their individual shelters. Clara made herself useful where she could. She couldn't swing a hammer or haul lumber, but she could organize. She could make sure food was distributed fairly. She could settle disputes before they escalated to violence. She became a presence in the town. Not quite accepted. That would take time, if it ever happened, but acknowledged. The marshal's wife, the woman with ideas. Some people nodded when they passed her on the street. Others crossed to avoid her. Clara tried not to care about either reaction. On the 8th day, trouble came. Clara was in the general store, helping Martha inventory supplies, when the door slammed open hard enough to rattle the jars on the shelves. "Where's the marshal?" The man was young, maybe 20, with wild eyes and dried blood on his knuckles. One of the miners, Clara recognized him from the work crew, though she didn't know his name. "He's at the church," Samuel said, moving subtly to place himself between the young man and the women. "What's this about, son?" "It's about—" The man seemed to see Clara for the first time. His expression twisted. "You. This is your fault. Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. What's my fault? The work, the rules, making us dance like trained dogs for scraps. He took a step forward. Samuel tensed. We were better off stealing. At least then we had our dignity. You had your desperation, Clara corrected, and somewhere in the back of her mind a voice was screaming at her to shut up, to not antagonize the angry man with bloody knuckles. But a louder voice, the one that had gotten her through her father's death, and the creditors, and the decision to get on that stagecoach, kept talking. You had your hunger and your hopelessness. The work gives you purpose. Purpose? He laughed, ugly and sharp. You don't know anything about us, about what we've lost. You're just some... The door opened again. Ethan, moving fast but not running, his hand near his gun but not on it. Walker. His voice cut through the tension like a knife. Step back. Marshall. I said step back. Ethan moved to stand beside Clara, not in front of her. Beside. Whatever you have to say, you say it without threatening my wife. Walker's jaw worked. For a moment, Clara thought he might actually go for the gun at his own hip, but something in Ethan's eyes, something cold and absolutely certain, made him reconsider. It's not working, Walker said instead. The church, the work. We're still starving, still cold, still trapped. You're working, you're eating, you're contributing. Ethan's voice was hard as iron. That's more than you had a week ago. It's not enough. Then leave. The words fell like stones. No one's keeping you here. The pass is clear. You want to go, go. But if you stay, you follow the rules. And rule 1 is you don't threaten people in my town. Walker's hands clenched into fists. Some of the others feel the same way I do. Then they can make the same choice. Work or leave. Those are the options. Ethan took a step forward, and despite being roughly the same height as Walker, he suddenly seemed larger. What you don't get to do is terrorize shopkeepers and scare women because you're angry about how your life turned out. We're all angry, Walker. We're all scared. But most of us manage not to make it everyone else's problem. The silence stretched. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, Martha's quick breathing, the tick of the clock on the wall. Finally, Walker stepped back. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Ethan's hand moved to his gun now, not drawing it, but making his position clear. It's over right now. You have until sundown to decide, work or leave. Come find me with your answer. Until then, you stay away from this store, away from my wife, and away from anyone who might mistake your anger for a threat. Walker left, slamming the door again. The moment he was gone, Clara felt her legs go weak. She grabbed the counter to steady herself. Are you hurt? Ethan's hands were on her shoulders, gentle but firm, turning her to face him. Did he touch you? No, I'm fine. He just startled me. Samuel, Martha, you both all right? We're fine, Marshall, Samuel said. Thank you for coming when you did. Clara, Ethan's voice dropped lower, meant only for her. You need to be more careful. Walker's one of the angry ones. I should have warned you. I was helping Martha. I was perfectly safe. You were alone with an angry man who's got nothing to lose. That's not safe. That's never safe. His jaw was tight, and Clara realized he was actually frightened. For her. Promise me you'll be more careful. I promise. She put her hand over his, still on her shoulder. But Ethan, I can't hide in the office forever. If I'm going to live here, I need to be part of the town. I know, He stopped, seemed to struggle with something. I need to know you're safe. I can't do my job if I'm worried about you every moment. Then teach me. Teach me how to be safe here. What to watch for, how to handle people like Walker. Don't just lock me away and hope nothing happens. He stared at her, and Clara saw the moment he understood. She wasn't asking for protection. She was asking for partnership. All right, he said finally. All right, we'll start tonight. But first, I need to deal with Walker and anyone else who's having second thoughts about the arrangement. Sundown came with 3 men standing in the marshal's office, Walker and 2 others from the work crew. Clara stayed upstairs, but she could hear everything through the floorboards. We're leaving, Walker said. Come spring, first chance we get. We're gone. But until then, we'll work, same as the others. We'll follow the rules. Why the change of heart? Ethan's voice was neutral, giving nothing away. Because Tommy Briggs told us we were being idiots. A different voice, older, said you could have shot all of us weeks ago or locked us up and let us freeze. It said the only reason we're alive is because you're trying to do right by everyone, even the ones who don't deserve it. Tommy's smart. Tommy's practical. Walker again. We're not saying we like this. We're not saying we're grateful, but we're saying we'll honor the deal. Work for food and shelter. Stay out of trouble. Good. That's all I ask. A pause. And Walker, what you did today at the store won't happen again. I was angry. I'm still angry, but I won't take it out on innocent people. See that you don't. Because next time, there won't be a conversation. Next time, you're in the cell or on a horse out of town. Clear? Clear. After they left, Clara came downstairs. Ethan was standing by the window, watching the three men walk away into the darkness. You handled that well, Clara said. Did I? Or did I just delay the inevitable? He turned to face her. They're still angry, still desperate. I haven't solved anything. I've just bought time. Time is valuable. Time lets things settle. Let people adjust. Clara moved to stand beside him. My father used to say that half of business was just surviving long enough for things to turn around. And did they? Turn around? No, but he tried. That's worth something. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, I promised to teach you how to be safe here. We should start. They spent the next hour at the table, Ethan showing her the basics. How to read a room, watch for signs of aggression, how to position herself near exits, how to deflect without escalating, how to tell the difference between bluster and real threat. Walker was bluster, he said, angry but not truly dangerous. Not yet, anyway. You see the way he kept his hand away from his gun? That's a tell. If a man's serious about violence, his hand goes to his weapon. It's instinct. What about men who don't carry guns? Then you watch their stance, their weight. Are they balanced to move fast, or are they just talking? He demonstrated, shifting his weight. Feel the difference? Clara tried to mirror his stance, feeling awkward and obvious. I feel ridiculous. You look ridiculous. But he said it without cruelty, almost with fondness. But you'll learn. Survival isn't natural. It's practiced. They worked until Clara's head was swimming with information. Watch the hands. Know your exits. Never corner someone. Never let yourself be cornered. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Enough for tonight, Ethan finally said. You're exhausted. I'm fine. You're swaying on your feet. Go to bed, Clara. We'll continue tomorrow. She wanted to argue, but he was right. The adrenaline from the encounter with Walker had long since faded, leaving her drained and shaky. Ethan? Yes? Thank you for teaching me instead of just protecting me. He looked at her with those slate-gray eyes, and something in his expression softened. You're my wife. Even if this marriage is practical, even if we're strangers, you're still mine to protect. But you're right. Protection without preparation just makes you dependent. I don't want you dependent. I want you capable. Because capable people survive? Because you deserve to be more than just someone who survives. He said it simply, like it was obvious. You're smart, Clara. You've got good instincts. You figured out the solution to the mining problem faster than I did. I'd be a fool to waste that by keeping you locked away like some fragile thing. Clara felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Then people back east were idiots. He turned away, suddenly uncomfortable again. Get some sleep. Tomorrow the schoolhouse foundation gets started. They'll need organizing. Clara climbed the stairs, her mind too full for sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay in bed listening to Ethan move around below, and thought about the strange shape her life had taken. 3 weeks ago, she'd been Clara Whitmore of Philadelphia, desperate and alone. Now she was Clara Hale of Hecla, Montana, still figuring things out, still uncertain, but not alone. Not anymore. And somewhere between the stagecoach and the church wall and the confrontation with Walker, she'd started to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope that things might somehow work out, but the solid, determined hope that came from working alongside someone who believed you were capable of more than just surviving. Outside, the wind picked up again. Another storm coming, probably. There was always another storm, but Clara found she wasn't afraid. She'd survived this far, and she had a feeling she was just getting started. The schoolhouse foundation was a disaster from the start. Not because the men didn't know what they were doing, some of them had built half the mines in Montana before the company pulled out. The problem was the ground itself. Frozen solid 2 feet down, and below that, rock that laughed at their pickaxes and made their hands bleed through thick gloves. Clara stood at the edge of the work site, wrapped in a coat Martha had loaned her because her own wasn't nearly heavy enough for Montana winters, and watched grown men curse at dirt that refused to cooperate. "We're going to need dynamite," one of them called out to Ethan. His name was Tommy Briggs, the same one who'd apparently talked sense into Walker and the others. He was older than most of the crew, maybe 50, with a beard going gray and eyes that had seen enough trouble to recognize it coming. "Or we wait until spring when the ground thaws." "We don't have until spring," Ethan said. "Kids need somewhere to learn before winter really sets in." "Then we need dynamite, or a miracle. I'm fresh out of miracles, so dynamite it is." Clara watched the exchange, her mind working. "What if we don't dig down? What if we build up instead?" Both men turned to look at her. Tommy's expression was skeptical. Ethan's was considering. "Explain," Ethan said. "The ground's frozen. Fine. So instead of fighting it, we work with it. Build a platform foundation above ground, anchor it with rocks and packed earth around the base. We lose a little insulation, but we gain time and avoid the cost of dynamite we probably can't afford anyway." "Platform won't be as stable," Tommy said, but he was thinking about it, Clara could tell. "Come spring thaw, the whole thing could shift." "Then we reinforce it in spring, add proper footings once the ground cooperates. But at least the kids have somewhere to be this winter." Clara looked at Ethan. "How much do we have in the town fund for this project?" "Not enough for dynamite, that's certain." He rubbed his jaw. That gesture Clara was starting to recognize meant he was actually listening. "How do you know about platform foundations?" "My father built a summer house once on rocky ground near the coast. Same principle. If you can't dig down, build up, and anchor smart." She turned to Tommy. "What do you think, really?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment, studying the frozen ground, the pile of lumber, the gray sky that promised more snow. "I think it's either that or we wait until April, and I think these kids need school before they forget how to read. So yeah, let's try it." The decision made, the work shifted. Instead of fighting the ground, they started hauling rocks from the creek bed, frozen solid but accessible, and building up support columns. It was slower than digging would have been, but it was progress. Clara could see it in the men's faces, the way frustration transformed into something like purpose. She was so focused on watching the work that she didn't notice the woman approaching until she spoke. "So you're the one who thinks she can fix everything?" Clara turned to find a woman about her own age, maybe a few years younger, with dark hair pulled back severely, and an expression that suggested she'd been disappointed by the world and had stopped being surprised about it. She wore a faded calico dress under her coat and carried a basket that smelled like lye soap. "I don't think I can fix everything," Clara said carefully. "I'm just trying to help where I can. By telling men how to do their jobs, by convincing my husband that your marshal's too soft to do what needs doing." The woman's voice was sharp enough to cut. "I'm Sarah Walker. Guess you've already met my husband." Claire's stomach sank. "Mrs. Walker, I'm sorry about what happened at the store. I didn't mean to—" "Save it." Sarah shifted her basket to her other hip. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to tell you that playing at being some kind of town savior is going to get people hurt. These men don't need your charity. They need real solutions. The work isn't charity. It's a temporary fix to a permanent problem. And when winter really hits, when people start dying because they're still hungry despite your pretty little work program, whose fault is that going to be?" Sarah's eyes were hard. "You don't know what it's like out here. You don't know what real desperation feels like. You're playing house with the marshal while people are trying to survive." "I know more about desperation than you think," Clara said quietly. "And I know this isn't perfect, but it's better than nothing." "Is it?" Because nothing doesn't give people false hope. Nothing doesn't make promises it can't keep. Sarah looked past Clara to where the men were working, where her husband was lifting rocks with the others. My husband wants to believe this will work. He wants to believe there's a future here, and when he finds out there isn't, when this all falls apart, it's going to destroy what's left of him. What if it doesn't fall apart? Then I'll eat my words and thank you for it. But out here, things fall apart. It's what they do. Sarah turned to leave, then stopped. And Mrs. Hale? If you're going to insert yourself into this town's business, at least have the decency to stick around when it gets ugly. Don't run back east when winter proves harder than you expected. She walked away before Clara could respond, leaving her standing in the cold with the smell of lye soap and the weight of truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Don't let Sarah get to you, Martha said, appearing at Clara's elbow like she'd been summoned. She's angry at the world, and you're just the closest target. She's right, though, isn't she? I don't know what I'm doing. I'm making suggestions like I understand this place, but I don't. I've been here less than 2 weeks. And in those 2 weeks, you've done more thinking about solutions than most people do in a year. Sarah's scared. Fear makes people mean. Martha linked her arm through Clara's. Come on. I need help organizing the food distribution for next week, and you're better with numbers than I am. They walked back toward the general store together, Martha chattering about inventory and Clara trying not to think about Sarah Walker's words. But they stayed with her. Because underneath the anger, underneath the fear, there was truth. Clara didn't know what she was doing. She was improvising, guessing, hoping she was right. And if she was wrong, people would pay for it. That night, lying in bed while Ethan moved around downstairs with his usual quiet efficiency, Clara stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Not in coming here. She'd had no choice about that. But in speaking up, in offering solutions when she had no real understanding of the problems. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe false hope was worse than no hope at all. The next morning brought news that drove all philosophical concerns from Clara's mind. Fire at the Henderson place, Ethan said, already dressed and moving before the sun was fully up. Chimney caught, spread to the roof. Family got out, but they lost everything. Clara was on her feet immediately. What do they need? Everything. Clothes, food, shelter. They've got 3 kids under 10 and nowhere to go. He was strapping on his gun belt, checking his weapon with practiced hands. I need to get over there, assess the damage, see if we can salvage anything. I'm coming with you. Clara. I'm coming with you, she repeated, already pulling on the coat Martha had loaned her. If they need help, I can help. You said yourself I should be part of this town. Well, this is part of it. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. Stay close, and if I tell you to do something, you do it immediately. Understood? Understood. The Henderson place was on the edge of town, a small cabin that had probably been modest even before the fire. Now it was a smoking ruin. The roof collapsed inward. The walls blackened and unstable. The family stood in the yard, wrapped in blankets someone had brought, staring at what remained of their home with the blank expression of people still in shock. Anna Henderson was young, maybe 25, with 3 children clinging to her skirts. Her husband Tom stood slightly apart, his face smudged with soot, his hands wrapped in cloth that was seeping red. Tom tried to save some things, Anna said when Ethan approached. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. Went back in after we got the kids out. Got our winter stores, some clothes. Then the roof came down. Let me see your hands, Ethan said gently. Tom held them out. The cloth came away sticky, revealing burns that made Clara's stomach turn. Not terrible. She'd seen worse when her father's business partner had been injured in a factory accident, but bad enough. We need to get these cleaned and wrapped properly, Clara said, forcing her voice to stay calm. And we need somewhere warm for the children. They're freezing. They can come to the store, Martha said. Clara hadn't even heard her arrive, but suddenly she was there, along with Samuel and 6 other townspeople. We've got the back room. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. I'll take them, Anna said. Tom, you go with the marshal. Get your hands seen to. But Tom shook his head. I need to see what we can save. Need to... He looked at the ruins of his home, and something in his face cracked. We lost everything. 5 years building this place, building a life, and it's gone. Just gone. You've got your family, Ethan said quietly. That's not nothing. It's not enough. Tom's voice broke. How do we start over? We've got no money, no resources, winter's coming, and we've got nowhere to live. The crowd had grown. More townspeople gathering, drawn by smoke or gossip, or the human instinct to witness disaster. Clara could feel their attention, their judgment. This was a test, not just for Tom and Anna Henderson, but for the whole community. How they responded would say everything about what kind of town this was. You'll stay with us, someone said. Clara turned to see an older couple, the Mitchells. She thought Martha had mentioned them. We've got the room since our sons moved on. Not much, but it's warm. And we'll take up a collection, Martha added. Get you some supplies to start over. The men working on the schoolhouse can help rebuild, Tommy Briggs said. He'd followed them from the work site. We've got the skills and the time. Might as well put it to good use. Clara watched the offers pile up, watched the Henderson family's faces shift from despair to something like hope, and felt her throat tighten. This was what community looked like. Not perfect, not without friction, but showing up when it mattered. We'll get through this, Ethan said, his hand on Tom's shoulder. But first, let's get those hands treated before they get infected. Clara, can you help? They ended up in the marshal's office because it was closest and warmest. Tom sat at the table while Clara carefully cleaned his burns with water from the kettle Ethan kept on the stove. She'd done this before, tended her father's injuries when he'd worked himself too hard, when the stress had manifested in carelessness and cuts and burns from his pipe. This is going to hurt, she warned before applying the salve Martha had provided. Tom gritted his teeth but didn't make a sound as Clara worked. Ethan watched from across the room, ready to help if needed, but letting Clara handle it. Thank you, Tom said when she was finished bandaging. Both of you, for everything. Don't thank us yet, Ethan said. Rebuilding's going to be hard work, harder than you think. Everything out here is harder than I think, Tom said with a weak smile. But we knew that coming in, just sometimes you forget how hard until it hits you in the face. Or burns down your house, Clara said, trying for lightness. Or that. Tom looked at his bandaged hands. Your wife's got steady hands, Marshall, and a good touch. Medical training? No, just experience. Clara cleaned up the supplies, tried not to think about all the times she'd patched up her father's pride along with his injuries. You should rest those hands for a few days. Let them start healing before you try to use them. Can't rest. Too much to do. Then you'll make them worse and be useless for weeks instead of days, Ethan said flatly. Listen to her. She knows what she's talking about. After Tom left to rejoin his family, Clara and Ethan were alone in the office. The fire crackled. Outside, the sound of hammering resumed as men went back to work on the schoolhouse foundation. You did well, Ethan said. I cleaned and bandaged some burns. It's not exactly heroic. You stayed calm. You knew what to do. That's more than most people manage their first crisis. He poured coffee, offered her a cup. And before, at the work site, the platform foundation idea. Tommy says it'll work. Tommy was being kind. It might work, or it might collapse in the spring. But it's a chance, which is better than no chance. Ethan sat across from her, cradling his own cup. You're good at this. Seeing solutions where other people just see problems. Or I'm good at convincing people my guesses are plans. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Sarah Walker thinks I'm giving people false hope. Maybe she's right. Sarah Walker is angry at a world that's been cruel to her. Don't mistake her fear for wisdom. He took a sip of coffee. And hope isn't false just because it might not work out. Sometimes hope is all that keeps people going. Is that what keeps you going? Hope? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. Duty, responsibility, the knowledge that if I don't do this job, nobody will. He set down his cup. Hope is harder. Hope requires believing things can get better. I'm not sure I believe that anymore. Then why did you send for a wife? Why bother with any of it if you don't think things can improve? Because the town needed it. Because people were starting to question whether I was committed to staying, and a man without a wife looks like a man ready to leave. He met her eyes. I told you from the start, Clara. This was practical. I needed you for appearance's sake. Right. Clara felt something twist in her chest. stupid to feel disappointed. He'd been honest from the beginning. This was a business arrangement. Well, I hope I'm serving that purpose adequately. That's not... He stopped, seemed to struggle with something. You're doing more than I expected, more than I had any right to ask for, and I don't want you to think I'm not grateful. I don't need gratitude. I need to know I'm not making things worse by being here. You're not. He said it with absolute certainty. Whatever Sarah Walker said to you, whatever doubts you're having, you're helping. The town sees it. I see it. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that she wasn't just playing at being useful while actually causing damage, but doubt was a hard thing to shake once it took root. The Hendersons will rebuild, Ethan continued. The schoolhouse will get built, one way or another. The miners will make it through winter, not because everything's perfect, but because people are trying. And a lot of that trying started with you pushing for solutions instead of just accepting how things are. Or I got lucky and my wild guesses happened to work. Maybe. But I'll take lucky guesses over no ideas at all. He stood, carried his cup to the wash basin. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be busy. Ethan? He turned, eyebrows raised. When you said hope was harder than duty, did something happen? Something that made you stop hoping? His expression shuddered so quickly, Clara almost missed it. That's a conversation for another time. If ever. And that was that. The wall came up, solid and immovable, and Clara knew better than to push. She'd been married to this man for less than 2 weeks. She had no right to his secrets, no claim to his past, even if she was starting to wish she did. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Work on the schoolhouse progressed, slower than anyone wanted, but progress nonetheless. The church wall stood firm against the next storm, and the men who'd built it started to look less like desperate criminals and more like workers with purpose. Tom Henderson's hands healed enough that he could help plan the rebuilding of his house, even if he couldn't swing a hammer yet. Clara found herself settling into the strange shape of her new life. She helped Martha at the store, organized food distribution, mediated disputes between townspeople before they escalated to violence. She learned to read the weather by the quality of light, to judge the severity of a storm by the way the horses in the livery stable reacted, to tell which men could be trusted and which ones needed watching. And slowly, carefully, she and Ethan circled around each other like dancers learning a complicated step. He taught her practical things, how to shoot. Not well, but well enough to hit a target at close range if her life depended on it. How to navigate the town in a whiteout by counting buildings and using sound. How to break up a fight without getting hit herself. How to read the subtle signs that separated drunk and harmless from drunk and dangerous. She taught him things too, though she didn't think he realized it. How to delegate instead of trying to do everything himself. How to listen to people's ideas without immediately shooting them down. How to see the town's problems as puzzles to solve instead of burdens to carry alone. They didn't talk about personal things, didn't share their pasts or their fears, but they worked together with increasing efficiency, and sometimes in the evening when they both sat at the table reviewing the day, Clara would catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not affection, not exactly, but something softer than the wary neutrality he'd started with. 3 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived. The stagecoach driver handed it to Clara personally, his expression carefully neutral. The envelope was expensive paper, cream-colored with her former address written in flowing script. Harold Pemberton's handwriting. Her hand shook as she took it. "Bad news?" the driver asked. "I don't know yet." Clara forced a smile. "Thank you for delivering it." She waited until she was alone in the office before opening it. Ethan was out checking on the Henderson rebuild, wouldn't be back for hours. Clara sat at the table, stared at the envelope, and tried to convince her hands to stop trembling. Finally, she opened it. The letter was brief, almost conversational. Harold expressed his surprise at hearing she'd married and moved west, congratulated her on her escape from Philadelphia's difficulties, mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that her father's debts remained unpaid and that the creditors were becoming insistent about collecting. And then, in the final paragraph, the threat hidden behind polite language. "Of course, I've assured them that you're unreachable in your frontier outpost, but one never knows how persistent these men might become. It would be unfortunate if they decided to pursue the matter legally, especially given your father's irregular bookkeeping in the final months. I would hate to see your name, or your new husband's, dragged through courts over matters that could be settled so much more amicably. Clara read it 3 times, each reading making her stomach tighten further. This was what she'd run from. The polite threats, the suggestion that her father had been criminal, not just unlucky, the implication that Harold could make problems disappear if she'd just agree to his terms. Terms he'd made clear before she left. Her hand, her body, her future. In exchange for clearing debts that might or might not actually exist. She should burn the letter, throw it in the stove, and watch it curl into ash. That part of her life was over. Harold Pemberton had no power here. Except he did, didn't he? Because debt followed you, and accusations followed you. And if he convinced a judge that her father had committed fraud, if he pushed hard enough, it wouldn't matter that Clara was married and living in Montana. They could still come after her. After Ethan. After everything she was trying to build. Clara? She jumped, nearly dropping the letter. Ethan stood in the doorway, snow on his shoulders, his expression concerned. "You're back early," she managed. Henderson rebuild hit a snag. They need to wait for more lumber. He closed the door, studied her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Just a letter from back east." "From who?" Clara hesitated. She could lie. Could say it was from a friend, some innocuous correspondence. But lies had a way of compounding, and she was tired of hiding. "Harold Pemberton, my father's former business partner." Ethan went very still. "The one who made you leave?" "He didn't make me leave. He just made staying complicated." Clara set the letter on the table, pushed it toward him. "You should read it." He did, his expression darkening with each line. When he finished, he set it down with careful precision, like he was restraining the urge to tear it apart. "This is a threat. It's a suggestion wrapped in pleasantries. Harold's good at those." "It's a threat," Ethan repeated. "He's implying your father committed fraud, suggesting he could cause legal problems for both of us if you don't— What? Go back? Submit to whatever arrangement he wanted?" "Something like that." Clara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire. "I'm sorry, I didn't think he'd follow up. Didn't think he'd care enough to bother once I was gone." "Men like that don't let go of things they think they own." Ethan's voice was hard. "And he thought he owned you. I'm not his property. I know that, but he doesn't." Ethan picked up the letter again, read it with the same careful attention he gave to wanted posters and territorial law. "The accusations about your father's bookkeeping, are they true?" "I don't know. Maybe. Father was desperate at the end, making deals he shouldn't have made. But fraud?" Clara shook her head. "I don't think so. I think Harold's inventing problems so he can offer to solve them. That's extortion. That's business, apparently. At least the way Harold conducts it." Clara tried to smile, failed. "I'll write back. Tell him the debts aren't my responsibility, that I'm married now and beyond his reach. Maybe that will end it. And if it doesn't, then I'll deal with it. But I won't let him drag you into my family's mess. This is my problem, not yours." Ethan set the letter down, came around the table to stand in front of her. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that Clara had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You're my wife," he said quietly. "That makes your problems mine. Whether this marriage is practical or not, whether we barely know each other or not, when you took my name, you got my protection. All of it." "Ethan, I mean it, Clara. If this Harold Pemberton wants to threaten you, he's going to have to go through me, and I'm a lot less civilized than he's probably used to dealing with." Clara felt something break loose in her chest. Relief, maybe. Or gratitude. Or something deeper that she wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me. Just trust me." He stepped back, giving her space. "Write your letter. Tell him you're done with Philadelphia and everything in it. And if he pushes back, we'll figure it out together." "Together," Clara repeated, testing the word. It felt strange. Foreign. She'd been alone for so long, making decisions by herself, that the idea of someone else carrying part of the weight seemed almost impossible. But also, good. It felt good. That night, Clara wrote her response. Brief and direct, nothing like Harold's flowery threats. She stated that her father's debts had died with him, that she had no legal obligation to pay them, and that any further correspondence would be ignored. She didn't mention Ethan specifically, but she signed it Clara Hale with a firmness that felt like armor. The letter went out on the next stagecoach, and Clara tried to convince herself that would be the end of it. But doubt was a persistent thing. It lived in the back of her mind, whispering that Harold Pemberton wasn't the type to give up easily, that men like him viewed resistance as challenge, not deterrent. She didn't tell Ethan about the doubt, didn't want to burden him with fears that might never materialize. Instead, she threw herself into work. The schoolhouse was nearly finished, roof on, walls up, windows installed. It needed a teacher, and Clara found herself volunteering before anyone else could. "You sure?" Martha asked when Clara mentioned it. "Teaching a room full of frontier kids isn't like teaching at some fancy Eastern school." "I never taught at a fancy Eastern school. I never taught anywhere. But I can read and write and do mathematics, which is more than some of these children are getting right now." Clara folded a bolt of fabric they'd been organizing. "Besides, someone needs to do it. Might as well be me." "Ethan know you're planning this?" "Not yet, but he'll support it. He wants the school operational." Martha gave her a look that suggested she saw more than Clara was saying. "This isn't about Harold Pemberton's letter, is it? Trying to prove you're useful so you can stay." "I am useful, and I am staying." Clara met her gaze steadily. "But yes, maybe part of it is wanting to establish myself as more than just the marshal's convenient wife. The school needs a teacher. I need a purpose. It works for everyone. Just don't burn yourself out trying to prove something to people who've already accepted you." "Have they accepted me?" "More than you think. You're not the outsider anymore, Clara. You're one of us now, whether you feel like it or not." Clara wanted to believe that, wanted to trust that she'd actually found a place here, that this wasn't just another temporary solution to a permanent problem. But trust was hard when you'd learned that everything could collapse without warning. The schoolhouse opened on a cold morning in late November. 15 children showed up that first day, ranging from 6 to 14, with varying levels of education and enthusiasm. Clara stood at the front of the room, looking at their faces, skeptical, curious, bored, hopeful, and felt terror wash over her. What was she doing? She wasn't a teacher. She didn't know how to manage a classroom or develop a curriculum or handle discipline, but she was here and they were here, and someone had to start. "Good morning," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "My name is Mrs. Hale, and I'll be your teacher. I'm new to this, so we're going to learn together. But I promise you this, if you show up and try, I'll make sure you leave here knowing more than when you arrived." One of the older boys, she thought his name was Jack, raised his hand. "What if we don't want to learn?" "Then you'll sit quietly while others do, but you'll still show up because your parents are making you, so you might as well get something out of it." He grinned, surprised by her directness. "Fair enough." They started with assessment. Clara needed to know what each child already knew before she could teach them anything new. It was messy and chaotic and nothing like she'd imagined, but by the end of the day she had a rough idea of where everyone stood. Most of them could read at a basic level. Their mathematics was shakier. Their history and geography were almost non-existent. But they were smart, resilient, and more eager to learn than they'd initially let on. Clara walked home that evening exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Ethan was at the office when she arrived, working on paperwork by lamplight. He looked up when she came in, and something in his expression softened. "How was it?" "Terrifying, wonderful, completely overwhelming." Clara collapsed into a chair. "I have no idea what I'm doing, but the children don't seem to know that yet." "You'll figure it out. You always do." He set aside his papers. "There's stew on the stove. Martha brought it by earlier." They ate together in comfortable silence, and Clara found herself watching him across the table. He looked tired. He always looked tired, but there was something different about him tonight, something less guarded. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You can ask. I might not answer." "Why did you really send for a wife? And don't say it was just for appearance's sake." "I'm starting to think there's more to it than that." Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying his bowl like it held answers. Finally, "I was married before. Did I mention that?" Clara's breath caught. No. Her name was Elizabeth. We met in Wyoming, married young. Too young, probably. His voice was flat, carefully emotionless. She died in childbirth. The baby, too. That was 4 years ago. I'm so sorry. Don't be. It was a long time ago. But his hands tightened on his spoon. After she died, I left Wyoming. Couldn't stay in a place that reminded me of her. Ended up here. Took the marshal job because it was something to do. Something that didn't require feeling anything. Clara wanted to reach across the table, touch his hand, offer comfort, but she sensed that would be unwelcome, so she just listened. I told myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need anyone, didn't want anyone, but the town kept asking questions. Why wasn't I courting anyone? When was I going to settle down properly? It got old. He finally looked up, met her eyes. So I sent for a wife. Someone who'd understand it was practical, not romantic. Someone who wouldn't expect me to fall in love again because I can't. That part of me died with Elizabeth. The words should have hurt, should have felt like rejection. Instead, Clara just felt sad for him, for the way he'd locked himself away from anything that might risk pain. Thank you for telling me, she said quietly. I'm telling you so you understand. This marriage, it can be partnership, friendship even, but it won't be love. I can't give you that. I'm not asking for it. Aren't you? His gaze was sharp. You're young, Clara. You deserve more than a man who's already used up his capacity for feeling. I'm 26. I'm not some starry-eyed girl dreaming of romance. Clara set down her spoon. I came here for survival, remember? For escape. Everything else is just bonus. Right. He didn't look convinced. I just wanted to be clear. You've been clear, and I'm still here, aren't I? They finished eating in silence that felt heavier than before, weighted with truths neither of them quite knew what to do with. That night, lying in bed, Clara thought about Elizabeth, the wife Ethan had loved and lost, the woman whose memory still held so much space in his heart that there was no room for anyone else. Clara should have been jealous, maybe, or resentful, but she just felt tired. Tired of complications, tired of wanting things she couldn't have, tired of trying to build a life on ground that never stopped shifting. Outside, the wind picked up. Another storm coming. There was always another storm. But Clara had weathered storms before. She'd weather this one too, even if it came from inside instead of out. Winter came down like a hammer in early December. Not the manageable cold Clara had experienced so far, but real winter. The kind that froze water in the basin overnight, that made breathing hurt, that turned the world into a landscape of white and gray where everything beyond 50 feet disappeared into nothing. The schoolhouse became a refuge. Clara kept the stove burning hot enough that the children could take off their coats without shivering, and she stretched lessons to keep them inside as long as possible. Some of them walked miles to get there, and she'd be damned if she sent them back out into the cold a minute sooner than necessary. On the worst days, when the wind screamed and the snow fell sideways, some children didn't come at all. Their parents kept them home, too worried about them freezing on the walk. Clara understood, but the empty seats still bothered her. Those were the children who needed school most, the ones from families barely hanging on, for whom education was the only possible path to something better. You can't save everyone, Ethan said one evening when she mentioned it. He was cleaning his gun at the table, the routine maintenance he performed every few days without fail. Some people won't be saved. I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm trying to teach them to read. Same thing, out here. Knowledge is survival. He held the barrel up to the lamplight, checking for imperfections. But you're wearing yourself out worrying about the ones who don't show up. Focus on the ones who do. That's a very practical attitude. It's the only attitude that works. He reassembled the gun with practiced efficiency. You care too much. It'll break you eventually. Clara set down the lesson plan she'd been working on. Did caring too much break you? Is that why you've locked yourself away from feeling anything? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Ethan's hand stilled on the gun. I'm not locked away from feeling. I just know better than to waste energy on things I can't control. That's exactly what being locked away means. You've decided that caring leads to pain, so you've stopped caring. That's not strength, Ethan. That's just fear. And you'd know all about fear, wouldn't you? His voice went cold. Running from Philadelphia, from debts, and a man who wanted to own you. At least I faced my pain. I didn't run halfway across the country to escape it. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Clara felt her cheeks flush, anger and hurt warring in her chest. "You're right," she said finally. "I ran. I was terrified and alone, and I ran. But at least I'm still trying to feel things. At least I haven't convinced myself that being numb is the same as being strong." Ethan stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to check the perimeter. Don't wait up." He left, the door slamming behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. Clara sat alone in the sudden silence, staring at her lesson plans without seeing them. They'd been doing so well, building something that almost felt like friendship, like partnership, and she'd ruined it by pushing too hard, by trying to crack open walls that had been built for good reason. She should apologize, should wait for him to come back and find some way to take back the words that had clearly wounded. But Clara was tired of apologizing for telling the truth. Ethan didn't come back that night. Or if he did, it was late enough that Clara was already asleep. In the morning, he was gone again, and there was a note on the table in his careful handwriting. "Trouble at the Western Claims will be back when it's handled." No signature, no indication of when he'd return. Just duty, pulling him away from the uncomfortable conversation they'd been having. Clara crumpled the note and threw it in the stove. The days that followed were strange. Clara went through her routines, teaching, helping at the store, mediating disputes, but everything felt off balance, like she was walking on ice that might crack at any moment. Martha noticed, of course. "You and the marshal have a fight?" "Something like that." "Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly." Clara reorganized a shelf of canned goods that didn't need reorganizing. "How long does he usually stay away when there's trouble at the claims?" "Depends on the trouble. Could be a day, could be a week." Martha studied her with sharp eyes. "He does this sometimes. Disappears into work when things get complicated." "Complicated meaning what?" "Meaning feelings. Ethan's not good with those. Never has been, but after Elizabeth died he got worse, just shuts down and runs." Clara set down the can she'd been holding. "Did you know her? Elizabeth?" "Met her once, years ago, before she and Ethan moved to Wyoming." "Sweet girl. Young. She loved him something fierce. You could see it in the way she looked at him." Martha's expression was sad. "When she died, it nearly destroyed him. He blamed himself, even though there was nothing he could have done. Childbirth out here is dangerous. We all know the risks. He told me about her, about how he can't love again." "And you believe him?" "Why wouldn't I? He's been perfectly clear about what this marriage is and isn't." Martha laughed, not unkindly. "Honey, men say all kinds of things to protect themselves. Doesn't mean those things are true. I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not paying attention. That's not a man who's incapable of feeling. It's not love either. Maybe not yet, but it's something. And something is more than he's allowed himself in 4 years. Martha put a hand on Clara's shoulder. "Give him time, and don't let him push you away just because he's scared." Clara wanted to believe her. Wanted to think that what they'd been building might actually become something real, but Ethan's words kept echoing. "It won't be love. I can't give you that." He'd been so certain, so absolute, and Clara had accepted it, had told herself she didn't need love anyway. But maybe Martha was right. Maybe she'd been lying to herself. Ethan came back 5 days later, looking exhausted and dirty and about 10 years older than when he'd left. He walked into the office while Clara was grading papers at the table, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Dispute settled," he said finally. "Two miners thought they had claim to the same vein. Turned out neither of them did. It was on public land. Had to enforce the filing properly before someone got shot over it. I'm glad you're back safe." "Clara, you don't have to apologize. You were right. I did run from Philadelphia, and I shouldn't have pushed you about Elizabeth." She set down her pen, forced herself to meet his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Stop." He crossed to the table, sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "You weren't wrong about me being afraid, about locking myself away." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I spent 5 days riding through snow and sleeping rough, and all I could think about was that fight, About the things you said. Ethan, let me finish. He lowered his hands, and his eyes were clearer than she'd seen them. You were right. After Elizabeth died, I convinced myself that caring was weakness. That if I just didn't let myself feel anything, I couldn't be hurt again. And it worked, for a while. But then you showed up, and you're so damn determined to fix everything and care about everyone, and it's... He trailed off, searching for words. Annoying? Clara offered weakly. Terrifying. He said it quietly. Because I'm starting to care again, and I don't know how to do that without it destroying me. Clara's heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. I'm not asking you to love me, Ethan. I know you can't. Don't tell me what I can't do. There was heat in his voice now, but not anger, something else. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know if it's love or just proximity and necessity, but it's something, and I'm tired of pretending it's nothing. So what do we do? I don't know. He reached across the table, hesitated, then took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. But maybe we stop trying to define it and just see where it goes. Clara looked down at their joined hands. It was such a simple gesture, but it felt monumental. A crack in the walls he'd built so carefully. I can do that, she said. They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked across the table, neither of them quite sure what came next, but both willing to find out. The moment broke when someone pounded on the door. Ethan released her hand and stood, instantly alert. Who is it? Tommy Briggs, Marshal, we got a problem. Ethan opened the door to find Tommy and two other men from the work crew, all of them looking grim. What kind of problem? The sick kind. Doc says it might be influenza. Hit 3 families so far, spreading fast. Tommy's weathered face was tight with worry. We need to quarantine them, but nobody wants to be locked in their houses to die. And if we don't stop it now, half the town could be dead by Christmas. Clara felt ice form in her stomach. She'd seen influenza tear through Philadelphia neighborhoods, seen entire families wiped out in a matter of weeks. Out here, without proper medicine, without doctors, it would be even worse. Who's sick? Ethan was already reaching for his coat. The Pratts, the Olsons, and Sarah Walker's family. Her husband and 2 of their kids are down hard. Sarah herself is still standing, but barely. Clara was on her feet before she could think. I'm coming with you. No, if it's influenza, you could catch it. I could catch it at the store, or at school, or walking down the street. It's probably already all through town. She grabbed Martha's loaned coat. You need help organizing care. I can do that. Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but Tommy cut in. She's right, Marshal. We need all the help we can get. Doc's overwhelmed already. Fine, but you stay away from the sickest patients. Understood? Understood. The Walker house was small and cold despite the fire burning in the hearth. Sarah sat in a chair by the bed where her husband lay, her face gray with exhaustion and fear. One child, a girl of maybe 8, lay in another bed, her breathing shallow and labored. The other sick child, a boy slightly older, was curled on a pallet on the floor. Sarah looked up when they entered, and Clara saw something in her expression shift. Not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement. Came to see if we're dying proper? Sarah's voice was hoarse. Came to help, Clara said. Tell me what you need. A miracle would be nice. Sarah turned back to her husband, pressed a wet cloth to his forehead. Failing that, I need someone to watch Mary while I tend to John and the boy. She's scared and I can't comfort her while I'm trying to keep the others alive. Clara looked at the girl in the bed. Mary's eyes were closed, her face flushed with fever. She was breathing, but each breath seemed to take effort. I'll watch her, Clara said, and I'll help with the others too. Just tell me what to do. Sarah stared at her for a long moment. You don't have to do this. I wasn't kind to you before. I'm not doing it because you were kind. I'm doing it because it needs doing. Clara moved to Mary's bedside, touched the girl's forehead. Burning hot. Do you have willow bark? Anything to bring down the fever? Used the last of it yesterday. Doc's supposed to bring more, but he's busy with the Pratts. I'll get some from Martha's store. Ethan, can you... I'll get it. He was already heading for the door. Tommy, organize shifts. We need people to help with all 3 families, but we rotate so nobody gets too exhausted. And keep the healthy members of each household isolated. Last thing we need is more people getting sick." He left, and Clara set to work. She'd never nursed influenza patients before, but she'd helped tend her father through pneumonia once. The principle was the same. Keep them comfortable, keep the fever down, keep them hydrated, and pray. Though Clara had stopped praying after her father died. It hadn't helped then. Probably wouldn't help now. Mary stirred, her eyes opening briefly. "Mama?" "Your mama's right here," Clara said softly. "I'm Mrs. Hale. I'm going to help take care of you, all right?" "Am I going to die?" The question asked in such a small voice nearly broke Clara's heart. "Not if I have anything to say about it." "Promise?" Clara wanted to promise. Wanted to give this scared child the certainty she deserved, but she'd learned the hard way that some promises couldn't be kept. "I promise I'll do everything I can," she said instead. "That's the best I can offer." Mary seemed to accept that. Her eyes drifted closed again, and Clara went back to the work of trying to save a life she'd only just met. The next week blurred into an endless cycle of fever and fear. Clara moved between the three affected families, helping where she could, learning to read the subtle signs that distinguish dangerous illness from survivable misery. She slept in snatches at the marshal's office, woke to Ethan shaking her shoulder gently, telling her it was time to go back. He worked just as hard, organizing the care, making sure supplies were distributed fairly, enforcing the quarantine when people tried to break it. More families got sick, the disease spreading despite their best efforts, but the organized response kept it from becoming the catastrophe it could have been. Sarah Walker's husband pulled through, so did the boy, but Mary got worse. Clara sat with her on the 8th night, sponging her forehead with cool water while Sarah slept in the chair, too exhausted to keep fighting. Mary's breathing had taken on a rattling quality that Clara recognized from her father's final days. "Mrs. Hale?" Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm tired." "I know, but you need to keep fighting, all right? Your mama needs you to fight." "I am fighting, but it's hard." Mary's hand found Clara's, squeezed weakly. "Will you tell Mama I tried?" "You're going to tell her yourself." Clara blinked back tears. "You're going to get better and tell her all about how brave you were." "Maybe." Mary's eyes drifted closed. "But just in case." She fell silent, and for a terrifying moment Clara thought she'd stopped breathing entirely. But no. There it was, shallow and labored, but still there. Clara held her hand and waited for morning. Dawn came gray and cold. Sarah woke, saw Clara still sitting with Mary, and something in her face crumpled. "She's still alive," Clara said quickly. "But barely. We need the doctor." "Doc's with the Pratts. Their baby took a turn last night." Sarah moved to her daughter's bedside, took her other hand. "I was cruel to you when you first came, said terrible things. You were scared and angry. I understood." "No, I was jealous." Sarah stroked Mary's hair with gentle fingers. "You came here and immediately started trying to fix things. Started making a difference. And I've been here for 3 years and all I've done is survive. Watching my children go hungry, watching my husband lose hope. And then you show up and within weeks things are better. It made me feel useless." "You're not useless. You're keeping your family alive. That's everything." "Is it?" Sarah looked at her daughter and tears finally spilled over. "Because I can't keep her alive, can I? All my fighting and she's still dying." "She's not dead yet." Clara squeezed Mary's hand. "And I'm not leaving until she's better or—" She couldn't finish that sentence. "I'm not leaving." They sat together through the day, two women who'd started as something like enemies, united by the fragile life between them. Ethan came by with food they didn't eat, with updates on the other families they barely heard. Tommy brought more willow bark. Martha brought blankets. And slowly, impossibly, Mary's breathing began to ease. It wasn't sudden, wasn't dramatic. Just a gradual shift from labored to slightly less labored. Her fever broke late that afternoon, sweat soaking the sheets, but her skin cooling under Clara's hand. "She's gonna make it," Sarah whispered, like saying it too loud might jinx it. "Isn't she?" "I think so." Clara felt exhaustion hit her all at once, her body finally admitting how much the past week had taken. "I think she's going to make it." Sarah started crying in earnest then, great heaving sobs of relief and fear and gratitude all mixed together. Claire put her arms around her, and Sarah didn't pull away, just cried on her shoulder while Mary slept and the worst of the crisis passed. The influenza burned through town for another 10 days before finally releasing its grip. In the end, they lost 5 people, including the Pratt's baby and old Mr. Chen, who ran the laundry. It could have been worse, should have been worse by all rights. But the coordinated response, the quarantine, the organized care, it had saved lives. Claire knew that. Everyone knew that. The town held a memorial service for the dead once the threat had passed. Reverend Thompson spoke about loss and resilience and community. Claire stood next to Ethan, exhausted to her bones, and watched as people she'd grown to know were lowered into frozen ground. Afterward, Sarah approached her. Mary was with her, still weak but walking, her hand tight in her mother's. "I wanted to thank you," Sarah said, "for staying, for not giving up on her." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do, and I wanted to apologize for what I said when you first arrived, about false hope and not belonging." Sarah's voice was steady. "I was wrong. You do belong here, maybe more than most of us." Clara didn't know what to say to that. Thankfully, Mary saved her. "Mrs. Hale, when school starts again, can I sit in front so I can see the board better?" "You can sit wherever you want, sweetheart." Clara knelt to Mary's level. "But school won't start for another week. You need to rest and get your strength back first." "I'm strong. Mama says I'm the strongest person she knows." "Your mama's right." Clara looked up at Sarah, saw understanding pass between them. But even strong people need to rest sometimes. After they left, Ethan moved to stand beside Clara. They watched the crowd disperse, people returning to their lives, to the work of surviving another day. "You did good," he said quietly. "We lost 5 people. We saved dozens more. Don't diminish that." He turned to face her. "You could have stayed safe, could have avoided the sick houses, avoided the risk, but you didn't. Neither did you. It's my job. It's not yours." "Maybe it is now." Clara looked at the town spread out before them, rough and hard and beautiful in its own way. "Maybe this is exactly my job. Teaching the children, helping the sick, being part of this place. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. And what about Harold Pemberton? What about Philadelphia and all the things you left behind?" Clara had almost forgotten about Harold's letter in the chaos of the epidemic. "I left them behind. Past tense. They don't matter anymore." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure that whatever happens, I'm not going back. This is my home now, for better or worse." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he did something unexpected. He took her hand right there where anyone could see and threaded his fingers through hers. "Good," he said, "because I don't want you to leave." It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't poetry or romance, just a simple statement of fact from a man who'd spent years avoiding facts that might hurt. But for Clara, it was enough. They walked back to the office hand in hand, and for the first time since arriving in Hecla, Clara felt like she might actually be building something that would last. The school reopened 2 weeks later. Attendance was down. Some families had lost children to the epidemic. Others were keeping their kids home out of lingering fear. But the ones who came were eager, grateful to return to routine. Clara found her rhythm again, teaching by day, helping Ethan with town business in the evenings, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied. They still slept separately, still maintained the boundaries of their practical marriage. But something had shifted between them during the epidemic. A recognition of partnership that went deeper than convenience. They worked together now with an ease that surprised them both. Ethan asked her opinion on town matters. Clara deferred to his judgment on law enforcement. They argued sometimes. Clara wasn't shy about disagreeing, but the arguments were productive. 2 minds working a problem instead of one. Martha watched it all with knowing eyes. "You two are getting domestic," she observed one afternoon while Clara helped inventory supplies. "We're married. That's generally how it works. You know what I mean? You're building a life together, a real one, not just a practical arrangement." Maybe. Clara didn't want to examine it too closely. Didn't want to risk naming it and having it dissolve like morning frost. "We're finding our way." "You're falling in love." "Martha, I'm not wrong. And before you tell me Ethan said he can't love again, consider that maybe he was lying, to himself as much as to you. Martha's expression was gentle. People say all kinds of things to protect their hearts. Doesn't make those things true. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist that what she and Ethan had was exactly what they'd agreed to: partnership, friendship, mutual survival. Nothing more complicated than that. But late at night, when she lay in her small room and heard him moving around below, she'd started wondering, started hoping. And hope, as she'd learned, was a dangerous thing. Christmas came with fresh snow and a community gathering at the church. Someone had managed to find a pine tree, and the children decorated it with paper chains and strings of berries. Reverend Thompson led carols. Martha and several other women had prepared food, not abundant, but enough. Clara stood with Ethan at the edge of the gathering, watching the children play. Mary Walker was among them, laughing and healthy, a miracle in human form. "You thinking about next year?" Ethan asked. "Next year?" "Whether you'll still be here. Whether this place will still feel like home." Clara looked at him, surprised. "Where else would I be?" "I don't know. You could go anywhere, back east, Denver, San Francisco. You're not trapped here, Clara. You chose this, but you can unchoose it if you want." "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" "No." He said it immediately, certainly. "But I want you to stay because you want to, not because you think you have no other options." Clara thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd left behind, the debts and the pressure, and Harold Pemberton's polite threats. That world felt impossibly distant now, like it had happened to someone else. "I'm staying because I want to," she said. "Because this town needs a teacher, and those children deserve an education. Because Martha needs help at the store, and Sarah Walker has become something like a friend. Because there's work here that matters." She paused. "And because you're here, and I'm not ready to leave that yet." Ethan's expression did something complicated. Relief and fear, and something softer all at once. "Clara, you don't have to say anything. I know what this marriage is. I'm not asking for more than you can give." She made herself smile. "I'm just saying that I'm choosing to stay, whatever that means." He looked at her for a long moment, and Clara wondered what he saw. Probably still the city woman who'd stumbled off a stagecoach 2 months ago. Probably still someone he wasn't quite sure how to categorize. But maybe, just maybe, something more. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "What?" "There's music. People are dancing. Dance with me." Clara looked at the gathering. He was right. Someone had brought a fiddle, and couples were moving in the space that had been cleared near the tree. It wasn't fancy, just simple steps in time with simple music. "I don't know the steps." "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." He offered his hand. Clara took it. And they joined the other couples, moving through steps they half remembered or invented, laughing when they got it wrong, finding a rhythm that was theirs alone. It wasn't love, Clara told herself. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. The music ended too soon, and they stood there in the middle of the church hall with their hands still linked, both suddenly aware that something had changed between one moment and the next. Not love, Clara kept telling herself, but the lie was getting harder to maintain. "I should check on the perimeter," Ethan said, though his eyes said he didn't want to leave. "It's Christmas. Can't someone else do it?" Marshall doesn't get days off. But he squeezed her hand once before letting go. "Save me some of whatever Martha's cooking. Smells like she actually found butter somewhere." He left, and Clara watched him go with a feeling in her chest that was becoming dangerously familiar. She turned back to the gathering, caught Martha watching her with that knowing look. "Don't say it," Clara warned. "Didn't say anything." Martha's smile was infuriating. "But if I were going to say something, it would be that you two look at each other the way Samuel and I did before we figured out we were already in love." "We're not." "Keep telling yourself that, honey. Maybe eventually you'll believe it." The rest of Christmas passed in a blur of food and music and children's laughter. Clara threw herself into the celebration, helping serve, cleaning up, anything to avoid thinking too hard about the way her heart had jumped when Ethan asked her to dance. It was dark when she finally made it back to the office. Ethan was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and the tired expression of a man who'd been patrolling in the cold for hours. "Everything quiet?" Clara asked, hanging up her coat. "Quiet as it gets," A few drunks at the saloon, but nothing serious. He pushed the other chair out with his foot. Sit. You've been on your feet all day. Clara sat, grateful despite herself. Her feet ached and her back was protesting the hours of standing. Did you eat? Martha caught me on my rounds, forced a plate on me. He took a sip of coffee. She also told me I was an idiot if I didn't realize what I had. Martha needs to mind her own business. Probably, but she's not wrong. Ethan set down his cup, met Clara's eyes directly. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about staying because you want to, not because you have to. Clara's heart started beating faster. And I realized I've been doing the same thing, telling myself this was practical, convenient, that I was just fulfilling a duty to the town. He paused, seemed to struggle with the words. But that stopped being true somewhere along the way. Maybe around the time you faced down Walker in the general store, or when you volunteered to nurse influenza patients. Or maybe it was earlier, that first day when you stood in the snow looking half frozen and still refused to back down. Ethan, let me finish. His voice was rough. I told you I couldn't love again. That Elizabeth took that part of me when she died, and I believed it. I really did. But Clara, I don't think that's true anymore. I think I've been lying to both of us because it was easier than admitting I was terrified. Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move, could only sit there while the man who'd promised her nothing but partnership rewrote all the rules they'd carefully established. You don't have to say anything, he continued. I'm not asking for promises or declarations. I just needed you to know that this, us, it's not practical anymore. Not for me. And if that changes things, if you need to leave or renegotiate or... Clara stood up, crossed to where he sat, and kissed him. It wasn't graceful. She almost missed his mouth entirely, caught him mid-sentence with his eyes wide in surprise. But then his hands came up to cup her face, and he was kissing her back, and nothing about it was practical or convenient or anything other than the terrifying, wonderful feeling of falling. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. So I'm guessing that means you're staying? Clara laughed, shaky and breathless. I'm staying. You're stuck with me. Good. He kissed her again, softer this time. Because I don't know how to do this, Clara. I don't know how to love someone without being afraid I'll lose them. But I want to try. Then we'll try together and probably mess it up spectacularly. Probably. His smile was real, reaching his eyes in a way she'd never seen before. But at least we'll mess it up together. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the lamplight while the town settled into sleep around them. Eventually, Clara pulled back enough to look at him properly. So what happens now? Now? Ethan stood, pulled her to her feet. Now I walk you upstairs like a gentleman and we figure out the rest tomorrow. You could stay, Clara said, her cheeks flushing. Upstairs, I mean. We are married. I could, but we've been doing this backward from the start. Maybe we should try doing something in the right order for once. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Court you properly. Take you to dinner. Well, whatever passes for dinner out here. Let you decide if you actually want this or if it's just the Christmas spirit talking. I don't need courting. I've already decided. Humor me. I want to do this right. You deserve that much. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to point out that they were already married, already living together, that courting at this point was ridiculous. But the sincerity in his eyes stopped her. 1 week, she said. You get 1 week to court me properly. After that, we stop pretending we're not already in this together. Deal. He kissed her forehead, gentle and sweet. Merry Christmas, Clara. Merry Christmas, Ethan. That night, lying in her bed alone, Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had just happened. She'd come here expecting nothing. A marriage of convenience, a place to hide from her past, survival, and nothing more. Instead, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was looking for. She'd found home. And against all odds, she'd found love. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it just made her smile. The week that followed was strange and wonderful in equal measure. Ethan took courting seriously, approaching it with the same focused intensity he brought to everything else. He brought Clara coffee in the morning before she went to teach, appeared at the schoolhouse door to walk her home, sat with her in the evenings, and actually talked about his past, about Elizabeth, and the guilt he'd carried, about his fears and hopes. "I was a terrible husband the first time," he admitted one evening. They were sitting by the fire, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I was young and stupid and thought love was enough. Didn't understand that marriage takes work, takes communication. Elizabeth deserved better than I gave her." "I'm sure that's not true." "It is. I was gone more than I was home, always chasing the next duty. And when she got pregnant, I was excited but also terrified. Didn't know how to be a father, didn't know how to balance family and work." His voice went quiet. "And then she died, and I never got the chance to figure it out. Never got to apologize for all the ways I failed her." "You didn't fail her. You were young and learning, and that's not the same thing." "Maybe. But it's why I'm trying to do better this time. With you." He turned to face her. "I don't want to make the same mistakes. Don't want to take you for granted or assume you'll always be here. I want to actually build something with you. Together." Clara felt her throat tighten. "You're already doing better than you think." "Am I?" He touched her face, gentle. "Because sometimes I look at you and I can't believe you're real. Can't believe you chose to stay when you could have had so many easier options. This town needs me. The children need a teacher. I need you, Tsep," he interrupted. "Not as a teacher or a nurse or someone to make me look stable. I need you." "Clara, the woman who argues with me about jurisdiction and tells me when I'm being an idiot and somehow convinced an entire town that reform was possible, I need you specifically, not just the role you fill." It was the most words she'd ever heard him string together at once, the most honest he'd ever been. Clara kissed him because she didn't know what else to do with the feeling expanding in her chest. They were still kissing when someone pounded on the door. Ethan pulled away with a muttered curse. This better be an actual emergency. It was Tommy Briggs, and his face was grim. "Marshal, you need to come to the saloon. There's a man asking for your wife. Says he's from Philadelphia and he's not leaving until he talks to her." Clara's blood turned to ice. "What does he look like?" "Fancy. Eastern clothes, clean-shaven. Looks like he's never done a day's hard work in his life." Tommy's expression was apologetic. "Says his name is Harold Pemberton." The bottom dropped out of Clara's world. She'd known, somewhere deep down, that Harold wouldn't give up easily. But she'd hoped that distance and her marriage would be enough to keep him at bay. Apparently not. "Stay here," Ethan said, already reaching for his gun. "No. If he wants to talk to me, I'll talk to him." Clara stood, forcing her legs to be steady. "But you're coming with me." "Damn right I am." The saloon was crowded for a weeknight, but everyone went quiet when Clara walked in with Ethan and Tommy. Harold stood near the bar, exactly as Tommy had described. Expensive suit, polished shoes, looking completely out of place among the rough men and rougher furniture. His face lit up when he saw her. "Clara, finally. I've been searching for you for weeks." "What are you doing here, Harold?" "Saving you, of course." He moved toward her, but Ethan stepped between them. Harold looked at him with barely concealed disdain. "And you must be the marshal." "I'm Harold Pemberton, Clara's fiancé." "Former business associate," Clara corrected coldly. "And I'm not your anything. What do you want?" "To bring you home. To settle this unfortunate misunderstanding." Harold's voice was smooth, reasonable. The same voice he'd used to corner her in her father's study, to make his unwanted proposition sound like a favor. "Your father's debts are considerable, Clara. Running away didn't make them disappear." "I didn't run away. I got married and moved. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Because from where I'm standing, you fled to the wilderness and married the first man willing to take you in. That's not exactly a sign of sound judgment." Harold's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But I'm willing to forgive it. Come back to Philadelphia with me, and we can make this right. The debts, the scandal, all of it. I'm not going anywhere with you." Clara stepped forward, putting herself between Ethan and Harold. "I don't owe you anything. My father's debts died with him." "Actually, they didn't. Pennsylvania law is quite clear on inheritance of debt. As his only heir, I inherited nothing. The creditors took everything of value. What's left is yours to fight over, not mine." Harold's expression hardened. "You're being unreasonable. I've come all this way to offer you a solution, and you're refusing out of what? Pride? Stubbornness?" I'm refusing because I don't want you. I never wanted you. You took advantage of my father's desperation and my grief to try to force me into a marriage I didn't want. That's not nobility, Harold. That's predation. The saloon had gone completely silent. Every eye was on them, watching the drama unfold. Harold seemed to realize they had an audience, and his face flushed. Be careful what accusations you make, Clara. I have documentation proving your father's debts, proving that he may have engaged in fraudulent practices to hide the extent of his losses. If this goes to court, then it goes to court. Ethan's voice was hard. But you'll do it without harassing my wife. She's made her position clear. Time for you to leave. I'm not leaving without her. I've invested too much in this situation to walk away empty-handed. You don't have a choice. Ethan's hand moved to his gun, not drawing but making his position clear. You can leave on the next stagecoach, or you can leave in a pine box. Those are your options. Harold's eyes narrowed. Are you threatening me, Marshal? I'm informing you of the law. In Montana Territory, harassment is taken seriously. So is making false accusations. Now, I'm willing to believe you came here with good intentions, however misguided. But those intentions don't give you the right to threaten or intimidate anyone in my town. So you're going to apologize to my wife, get on that stagecoach, and go back to wherever you came from. And if I refuse, then I arrest you for disturbing the peace, and you spend the next few nights in a cell that's not heated and doesn't have a proper privy. Your choice. The two men stared at each other, and Clara could feel the tension ratcheting higher. Harold wasn't used to being challenged, wasn't used to people saying no to him. But Ethan was immovable, his expression making it clear he'd follow through on every word. Finally, Harold stepped back. This isn't over, Clara. The debts are real, and they will be collected. Running to this frozen wasteland doesn't change that. Maybe not, but I'd rather face debt collectors than you. Clara's voice was steady. Go home, Harold. There's nothing for you here. He looked at her for a long moment, something ugly flickering in his eyes. Then he turned and walked out, the door slamming behind him. The silence in the saloon lasted exactly 3 seconds before everyone started talking at once. Clara felt her knees go weak, and Ethan caught her elbow. You all right? I'm fine. That was harder than I expected. You did well. Stood your ground. He guided her toward the door. Come on, let's get you home. They walked back through the dark streets, neither speaking until they were safely inside the office. Then Clara finally let herself shake. He came all this way, she said. He actually came all this way because I said no. Men like that don't accept rejection well. They think persistence is romantic. Ethan poured her whiskey, pressed the glass into her hands. Drink. Clara drank, coughing as the liquor burned. What if he's right about the debts? What if they can come after me legally? Then we deal with it. Together. Ethan sat beside her, solid and certain. But Clara, you need to tell me the truth. Is there any chance your father actually committed fraud? I don't know. Maybe. He was desperate at the end, making deals he wouldn't explain to me. But fraud? She shook her head. I don't think so. I think Harold's exaggerating to scare me. Probably, but we should be prepared just in case. He took her hand. Tomorrow I'll wire the territorial judge, get advice on the legal situation, and I'll make sure Harold gets on that stagecoach and actually leaves. What if he doesn't? Then I arrest him and make him leave. I'm the law here, Clara. He's not. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Montana's distance from Philadelphia would be protection enough. But she'd seen the look in Harold's eyes. He wasn't done. Not by a long shot. That night, she didn't sleep alone. Ethan stayed with her, not for romance, but for comfort, holding her while she shook and tried to convince herself that everything would be all right. His presence helped. The steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body, the quiet certainty that she wasn't facing this alone. I'm sorry, she whispered into the darkness. I brought this trouble to your town. Our town. And you didn't bring anything. That bastard followed you here. Ethan's arms tightened around her. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what marriage means. Real marriage. Not the practical arrangement we started with. When did it stop being practical? For me? Probably the first time you smiled at something I said. I just didn't want to admit it. His voice was quiet. For you? Clara thought about it. About the moment she'd stopped seeing Ethan as a stranger and started seeing him as something more. When you taught me to shoot, you were patient even though I was terrible, and you didn't laugh when I almost shot your hat off the fence post. You just adjusted my grip and told me to try again. You weren't that bad. I was terrible. But you made me feel capable anyway. She turned in his arms to face him. That's when I knew this wasn't just survival anymore. That's when I started hoping for more. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and Clara felt some of the fear from earlier finally loosen its grip. Whatever happened with Harold, whatever legal trouble might be coming, she wasn't alone. She had Ethan, had this town, had a life worth fighting for. Morning came too soon. Ethan was already up and dressed when Clara woke, standing at the window with his coffee. He's still here, he said without turning around. I can see him across the street, watching the office. Clara joined him at the window. Harold stood in front of the general store, his expensive coat pristine despite the muddy street. He looked up, saw them watching, and smiled. He's trying to intimidate us, Clara said. It's not going to work. I'm giving him until noon to be on that stagecoach. If he's not, I'm arresting him. On what charge? I'll think of something. Ethan turned to face her. But Clara, you need to go to the schoolhouse. Act normal. Don't let him see that he's getting to you. I can't just leave you to handle this alone. You're not leaving me alone. You're showing him that his presence doesn't change anything, that you have a life here that doesn't involve him. He touched her face. Trust me, this is how we win. Clara didn't feel like they were winning, but she got dressed, ate breakfast, and walked to the schoolhouse with her head high. The children were waiting, and they needed her. Harold Pemberton didn't get to take that away. The morning passed in a blur of lessons and questions and the comforting routine of education. Clara threw herself into teaching, using it as armor against the fear that kept trying to claw its way back up. At noon, she heard shouting from the street, then gunfire, a single shot that made her blood run cold. Everyone stay here, she told the children, already moving toward the door. Don't leave the building. She ran toward the sound, heart pounding, and found a crowd gathered in front of the saloon. Ethan stood in the middle of the street, his gun drawn, facing Harold, who had his hands raised. I said, get on the stagecoach, Ethan was saying, his voice deadly calm. That wasn't a suggestion. You shot at me. Harold's face was red with rage and fear. Warning shot. Next one won't be. Ethan cocked his gun. You've got two choices. Leave now or leave in shackles. Make your decision. Harold looked around, clearly hoping for support from the crowd. But the townspeople just watched, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Nobody was coming to his rescue. This is assault, Harold said desperately. I'll report you to the territorial authorities. Go ahead, they'll back me up. You were warned to leave multiple times, you refused, and you've been harassing a citizen of this town. That's enough for arrest in any jurisdiction. Ethan took a step forward. Now move. Harold looked past him, found Clara in the crowd. Is this what you want? To stay in this primitive place with these violent people? You could come home, Clara, have a real life again. This is my real life, Clara said clearly, and these are my people. Go home, Harold. There's nothing here for you. Something in his face crumpled. Not sadness, more like the rage of a child denied a toy. You'll regret this. When the courts come after you, when your father's crimes catch up with you, you'll wish you'd accepted my help. Maybe, but I'll face it on my terms, not yours. Harold looked between them. Clara and Ethan, the crowd of townspeople, the harsh landscape that had rejected him as completely as Clara had. Finally, he lowered his hands. Fine, I'll go. But mark my words, this isn't over. The law will find you, Clara Whitmore. And when it does, Clara Hale, Ethan corrected coldly. Her name is Clara Hale, and the law's already here. I'm looking at it. Tommy Briggs stepped forward. Stagecoach leaves in 20 minutes, Mr. Pemberton. I'd suggest you be on it. They watched Harold gather his bags from the hotel, watched him climb onto the stagecoach with as much dignity as he could muster, watched the coach pull away until it disappeared into the distance. Only then did Clara let herself breathe. Is he really gone? She asked. He's gone. Ethan holstered his gun. And if he's smart, he won't come back. And if he's not smart, then we deal with it, Together. He pulled her close, right there in front of everyone, and kissed her forehead. You all right? I am now. Clara leaned into him, taking comfort in his solidity. Thank you. For standing up for me. For protecting me. Always. He said it simply, like a vow. That's what marriage means. Around them, the crowd was dispersing, people returning to their business. But Clara caught Sarah Walker watching them, and when their eyes met, Sarah smiled. A real smile, warm and approving. Things were changing. The town was accepting her not just as the marshal's wife, but as one of their own. Someone worth protecting, someone who belonged. That afternoon, Clara returned to the schoolhouse to find the children exactly where she'd left them, quiet and wide-eyed. Is everything all right, Mrs. Hale? Mary Walker asked. Everything's fine, just some trouble that got resolved. Clara smiled. Now, where were we? I believe we were discussing Montana's territorial history. The rest of the day passed without incident, but Clara couldn't shake the feeling that Harold's departure wasn't the end of anything. He'd promised the law would find her, and men like Harold didn't make empty threats. She mentioned it to Ethan that evening. I sent that wire to the territorial judge, he said. Got a response this afternoon. Pennsylvania law does allow creditors to pursue inherited debts, but only if the heir actually inherited property or assets. Since you didn't, since everything was liquidated to pay partial debts, you're not liable for what's left. So Harold was lying. About your legal obligation, yes. About your father's potential fraud. Ethan hesitated. The judge says if there's evidence of actual criminal activity, they could potentially pursue you as an accomplice. But that would require proof, court proceedings, extradition paperwork. It's a lot of effort for what's probably not much money. But it's possible. It's possible, but unlikely. He took her hands. And even if it happens, we'll fight it. You're not alone in this, Clara. You have me. You have this town. We protect our own. Clara wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that Montana's distance and her new life would be shield enough. But doubt was persistent, whispering that trouble was coming whether they were ready or not. Still, when Ethan pulled her close that night, when he held her and made quiet promises about their future, Clara let herself hope. Let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something strong enough to weather whatever storms came next. After all, they'd survived everything else. Harold Pemberton was just one more obstacle to overcome, and they'd face it the way they faced everything else. Together. 3 weeks passed without word from Harold or Philadelphia, and Clara started to believe they might actually be free of it. She threw herself into teaching with renewed energy, watching her students grow more confident with each passing day. The town settled into winter's rhythm, hard work, shared meals, small victories against the cold. Then the letter came. Not from Harold this time, but from a law firm in Philadelphia. Official letterhead, formal language, the kind of document that made Clara's hands shake as she read it. They're claiming my father falsified business records, she told Ethan, the letter trembling in her grip. Saying he took investments under false pretenses, that the losses weren't accidental but deliberate fraud, and they want me to return to Philadelphia to testify. Ethan read the letter twice, his jaw getting tighter with each pass. This has Harold's fingerprints all over it. They say if I don't appear voluntarily, they'll pursue extradition, that I could be charged as an accessory if there's evidence I knew about the fraud. Clara felt sick. I didn't know, I swear to you, I had no idea what my father was doing at the end. I believe you. He set the letter down with deliberate care. But believing you and proving it in court are different things. If they actually have evidence your father committed fraud, this could get complicated. So what do I do? Go back? Face charges for something I didn't do? No, you fight. Ethan started pacing. First thing, I wire the territorial attorney, get proper legal advice. Second, we go through everything you remember about your father's business. Every detail, every conversation. If this is fabricated, there will be inconsistencies we can exploit. And if it's not fabricated, if my father really did commit fraud, then we prove you had no knowledge of it, that you were a daughter, not a business partner, that you can't be held responsible for his actions. He stopped pacing, turned to face her. Clara, I'm not letting them drag you back to Philadelphia to face trumped-up charges. Whatever this takes, Whatever we have to do, we're fighting this. The certainty in his voice should have been comforting. Instead, it just made Clara more aware of how much she stood to lose. Not just her freedom, but this life she'd built. The school, the town, Ethan, everything she'd found in this frozen corner of Montana. I'm scared, she admitted. Good. Fear keeps you sharp. He pulled her close. But don't let it paralyze you. We've faced worse than some Philadelphia lawyers trying to make a name for themselves. Over the next few days, Ethan made good on his promise. He wired the territorial attorney, contacted a lawyer friend in Denver, even reached out to the territorial judge for advice. Meanwhile, Clara tried to remember everything she could about her father's business in those final months. It wasn't much. Her father had been secretive, meeting with investors behind closed doors, working late into the night on books he wouldn't let her see. At the time, she'd assumed he was trying to protect her from the extent of the problems. Now she wondered if he'd been hiding something darker. There was a man, she told Ethan one evening. They were sitting at the table, surrounded by papers and notes. Mr. Carrington. He came to the house maybe a month before my father died, and they had a terrible argument. I heard my father shouting something about creative accounting and necessary measures. At the time, I thought he meant finding legal ways to save the business. But now you think he might have meant fraud. Ethan wrote the name down. This Carrington, was he an investor? I think so, or maybe a creditor, I wasn't sure. Clara pressed her hands to her temples. I should have paid more attention, should have insisted on knowing what was happening. You were a daughter trying to trust her father. That's not a crime. It might be negligence, though. If they can prove I should have known, they can't prove what you should have known. They can only prove what you actually knew. He reached across the table, took her hand. And you knew nothing, right? Right. I knew things were bad, but not the specifics, not the details. Clara met his eyes. You believe me, don't you? Completely. But more importantly, we're going to make sure everyone else believes you too. The response from the territorial attorney came a week later. It was both better and worse than Clara had feared. Better because the attorney confirmed that extradition would be difficult and expensive, requiring significant proof of criminal activity. Worse, because the Philadelphia law firm was apparently willing to pursue it anyway. They're serious about this, Ethan said, reading the letter, which means either they actually have evidence or someone's paying them very well to make your life difficult. Harold, probably, but we need proof of that. He set the letter aside. The territorial attorney suggests two options. One, you could return to Philadelphia voluntarily and face the charges. Hope to clear your name through testimony. That's not an option. If I go back, Harold wins. Even if I'm cleared of charges, I'll be trapped there dealing with legal proceedings for months, maybe years. Clara shook her head. What's option two? Fight the extradition. Force them to prove their case before you go anywhere. It's slower, more expensive, but it keeps you here. Ethan paused. There's also a third option the attorney didn't mention. What? We find proof that Harold's behind this, that he's using the legal system to harass you because you refused his proposal. If we can prove that, the case falls apart. Clara thought about it. How would we even begin to prove that? By being smarter than he is? Ethan stood, grabbed his coat. I'm going to wire some contacts back east. People who might know Harold, might know his business practices. If he's done this before, used legal threats to manipulate women, there'll be a trail. And if there's not, then we try something else. We keep trying until we find a way. He kissed her forehead. Stay here. Stay safe. I'll be back by evening. After he left, Clara sat alone with the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. She'd thought leaving Philadelphia meant leaving all of this behind. The corruption, the manipulation, the feeling of being trapped by circumstances she couldn't control. Instead, it had followed her here, threatening to destroy everything she'd built. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Sarah Walker, holding a basket covered with cloth. Brought you some bread, Sarah said. Martha mentioned you and the marshal have been working through meals. Figured you could use something decent to eat. Thank you. Clara took the basket, surprised by the gesture. Would you like to come in? I could use the company. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. For a bit. They sat at the table and Clara poured coffee while Sarah uncovered the bread, fresh and still warm. For a moment, they just ate in comfortable silence. "Heard you're having trouble with Philadelphia," Sarah said finally. "Legal trouble." Clara shouldn't have been surprised that word had spread. In a town this small, secrets lasted about as long as snow in July. "Some complications from my father's business. Nothing I can't handle." "You don't have to lie. Not to me." Sarah set down her coffee. "I know what it's like to run from something, to think you've escaped and then have it catch up with you anyway." "What did you run from?" "Poverty, abuse, a father who thought his daughters were property to be sold." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact. "I married young to get away from it. Came out here thinking distance would be enough. But you can't outrun your past. It finds you eventually." "So what did you do?" "I stopped running. Started building something worth staying for instead." Sarah looked around the office, at the evidence of Clara and Ethan's life together. "You've already done that. Built something. The school, your marriage, your place in this town. Don't let some Philadelphia bastard take that from you." "I'm trying not to, but the law is just people, and people can be fought." Sarah leaned forward. "You want my advice? Stop being afraid. Fear is what men like Harold count on. They think if they scare you enough, you'll crumble. Prove them wrong." Clara felt something shift in her chest. Sarah was right. She'd been so focused on the threat, on what could go wrong, that she'd forgotten her own strength. She'd survived her father's death, survived the creditors, survived leaving everything she knew. She'd built a life in one of the harshest places in America and made it work. She could survive this too. "Thank you," Clara said. "I needed to hear that." "Good. Now eat your bread and stop looking like the world's ending. It's not ending. It's just getting interesting." Sarah stood, gathering her things. "And Clara, if you need help, actual help, not just words, you let us know. The town takes care of its own." After Sarah left, Clara felt steadier. She cleaned up the office, organized her lesson plans for the next week, and by the time Ethan returned that evening, she'd made a decision. "We're going to fight this," she told him. "Not just legally, but actively. We're going to find proof that Harold's manipulating the system, and we're going to destroy his credibility so thoroughly that no one will believe anything he says." Ethan smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. "There's the woman I married." "Did you get any information from your contacts?" "Some. Harold Pemberton is known in Philadelphia business circles, and not in a good way. He's been accused of unethical practices before, nothing proven, but enough smoke to suggest fire. And there's a rumor he was involved in a similar situation 3 years ago. A widow whose husband owed him money. He offered to forgive the debt in exchange for marriage, and when she refused, he tried to have her charged with fraud." "What happened?" "The charges were dropped when evidence surfaced that Harold had falsified the documentation. He was censured by the business community but avoided legal trouble." Ethan pulled out his notes. The widow's name was Margaret Chen. She's living in Boston now. Clara felt hope flicker to life. "Can we contact her? Get her to testify to Harold's pattern of behavior?" "Already sent a wire. If she's willing to help, her testimony could be enough to discredit the current charges. Show that this is harassment, not legitimate legal action." "And if she's not willing?" "Then we keep digging. Harold's made enemies. Someone will talk." The response from Margaret Chen came faster than expected. She was not only willing to help, she was eager. Harold's actions had nearly destroyed her life 3 years ago, and she'd been waiting for a chance to return the favor. Her letter was detailed and damning. She explained how Harold had used her husband's debts to corner her, how he'd fabricated evidence of fraud when she refused his proposal, how she'd only escaped because a lawyer friend had discovered the falsified documents. She included copies of everything, the original accusations, the proof of Harold's manipulation, even character references from people who'd witnessed his behavior. "This is it," Ethan said, reading through the documents. "This is exactly what we need." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. She saved everything. 3 years, and she saved everything. Because she knew someone else would need it eventually. Men like Harold don't change, they just find new targets. He gathered the papers carefully. "I'm taking this to the territorial attorney tomorrow. With this evidence, they can petition to have the Philadelphia charges dismissed, and we can file countercharges against Harold for harassment and fraud. Will that actually work? It should. The pattern of behavior is clear, and Margaret Chen is a credible witness, a respectable widow from a good family. Her word carries weight. Ethan pulled Clara close. This is almost over. We're almost free of him. Clara wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that Margaret's evidence would be enough, but she'd learned not to count on anything until it was done. The next few weeks were tense. The territorial attorney filed the petition, presenting Margaret Chen's evidence along with testimony from the territorial judge confirming Clara's good character. The Philadelphia law firm pushed back, but their arguments grew weaker as more of Harold's past victims came forward. Apparently, Margaret Chen hadn't been the only one. There were at least 3 other women who'd been targeted by Harold over the years, all following the same pattern. Marriage proposals tied to debt forgiveness, legal threats when the women refused, falsified evidence of fraud or other crimes. By the time spring arrived, the case against Clara had completely fallen apart. The Philadelphia law firm withdrew their charges with a terse statement about new information coming to light. Harold himself was facing investigation for fraud and harassment, his reputation in tatters. Clara stood in the schoolhouse, watching her students work on their arithmetic, and felt the weight she'd been carrying finally lift. It was over. Harold was gone, the legal threats were gone, and she was free to build her life without looking over her shoulder. "Mrs. Hale?" Mary Walker raised her hand. "Are you all right? You look like you're going to cry." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just happy." Clara wiped her eyes, smiling. Sometimes happy looks a lot like sad. That evening, she found Ethan at the office, working through paperwork as always. He looked up when she came in, and his expression softened. "I heard. The charges are officially dropped." "Officially dropped," Clara confirmed, "and Harold's being investigated. Might actually face consequences this time." "Good. He deserves it." Ethan set aside his papers. "So what now?" "Now?" Clara sat beside him. "Now we live. We build. We stop worrying about the past and start focusing on the future." "Any particular future you have in mind?" Clara thought about it. About the school that needed expanding, the town that needed more infrastructure, the life she and Ethan were building together. "I want to make this place better, really better, not just surviving, but thriving. I want the school to be something special, want the children here to have real opportunities, and I want—" She paused, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I want a family, eventually, when we're ready." Ethan went very still. "A family. I know it's complicated. After Elizabeth and the baby, if you don't want—" "I do want," he said it firmly. "I'm terrified of it, but I want it. Want everything with you, Clara. The school, the town, a family, all of it." He took her hands. "You've given me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Hope. The ability to look forward instead of just surviving each day. I'm not letting that go." Clara kissed him, pouring 4 months of fear and love and determination into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. "So we're really doing this? Building a life together? All the messy, complicated, wonderful parts of it? We're really doing this." He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at the domestic stuff. Can't cook worth a damn, always forget to check if we need supplies, and I have a habit of tracking mud everywhere. And I'm stubborn, argumentative, and I'll probably try to reorganize your entire filing system again. I'm counting on it." He stood, pulled her to her feet. "Come on, let's go tell Martha and Samuel. They've been taking bets on when we'd finally admit this wasn't just a practical arrangement." "They have not. They absolutely have. Martha's had money on before spring since Christmas." They walked to the general store hand in hand, and Clara felt something settle in her chest. This was home. Not the office or the schoolhouse or any specific building, but this. Walking through the muddy streets with Ethan, being part of a community that had accepted her, building something that mattered. Martha took one look at them and whooped. "Samuel, pay up! I told you they'd figure it out before the thaw." "You bet on us?" Clara asked, torn between amusement and exasperation. Honey, the whole town's been betting on you two. You're not exactly subtle. Martha came around the counter to hug her. I'm glad you're staying, really staying, not just hiding out until something better comes along. This is something better, Clara said. Better than anything I left behind. The next few months passed in a blur of work and planning and slow, careful building of the life they wanted. The school expanded. They added a second room and started offering evening classes for adults who'd never learned to read. The town grew more stable as the work program Clara had suggested became permanent, giving structure and purpose to men who'd been lost. Summer came with heat that felt like blessing after the brutal winter. Clara stood in the schoolhouse doorway, watching her students play in the yard during recess, and felt a wave of contentment so strong it was almost frightening. You look happy, Ethan said, appearing beside her. I am happy, terrifyingly happy. She leaned against him. I keep waiting for something to go wrong. Things will go wrong. That's life. But we'll handle it together. He paused. Speaking of together, I was thinking maybe it's time we moved out of the office, got a proper house. There's land available on the north edge of town near the new church. A house? Clara's heart jumped. You mean build one? Why not? We've got the resources, the labor, and if we're talking about eventually having a family, he trailed off, looking almost shy. We'll need more space than a room above the marshal's office. Clara threw her arms around him, laughing. Yes, absolutely yes. Let's build a house. They broke ground the following week. It wasn't a large house, there were 3 rooms and a kitchen with space to expand later, but it was theirs. Clara helped with the planning, drawing rough sketches of where she wanted windows for light, where the kitchen should be positioned, how the rooms should connect. The whole town pitched in. Tommy Briggs led the construction crew, bringing the same careful attention he'd given to the church and schoolhouse. Sarah Walker helped Clara plan the kitchen, offering practical advice about what worked best in Montana's climate. Even the children from school contributed, hauling water and organizing supplies. By fall, the house stood finished, simple but solid, with glass windows that caught the morning light and a stove that pumped out heat efficiently. Clara walked through it, touching the walls they'd built, the floors they'd sanded, the life they'd created from nothing but determination and hope. What do you think? Ethan asked from the doorway. I think it's perfect. Clara turned to face him. I think we built something real here. Not just a house, but a home. We did. He crossed to her, pulled her close. And we're going to fill it with years and memories, and eventually, if we're lucky, children who will complain about chores and track mud everywhere. You make it sound so romantic. It is romantic, just a different kind than the storybooks. He kissed her softly, the kind that lasts. They moved in on a crisp October afternoon, carrying their few possessions from the marshal's office to their new home. It didn't take long. Neither of them had accumulated much in the way of material goods. But as Clara arranged her books on the shelf Ethan had built, as he hung his gun belt by the door, as they made coffee in their kitchen and sat at their table, it felt like the end of something and the beginning of something else. That night, lying in their bed in their house with Ethan's arms around her, Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here. The desperate decision to get on a stagecoach, the terror of meeting a stranger she'd agreed to marry, the slow transformation of survival into something deeper. What are you thinking about? Ethan murmured against her hair. How far we've come. How different this is from what I expected. Better or worse? Better. So much better. She turned in his arms to face him. I thought I was running away when I came here. Thought I was just trying to escape. But I wasn't running away. I was running toward this. Toward you. Toward this life. I just didn't know it yet. I didn't know it either. Thought I was just getting a wife for appearance's sake. Instead, I got a partner. Someone who challenges me and supports me and makes me want to be better than I am. You're already pretty good. I'm a work in progress. We both are. He kissed her forehead. But we're progressing together. That's what matters. Winter came again, but this time Clara faced it without fear. She had a home, a purpose, a man she loved and who loved her back. The storms still came, they always would in Montana, but she'd learned to weather them. The school thrived. Her students grew in knowledge and confidence, and some of the older ones started talking about going to college in Denver or Helena. Clara encouraged them, helped them plan, watched them dream of futures that had seemed impossible a year ago. The town continued to grow and stabilize. The work program became a model that other Montana communities started to copy. Crime dropped. The church was rebuilt properly. The Henderson family had a new house that was better than their old one. Small victories, but they added up to something significant. And in the spring, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. He went very still, his hand freezing on her shoulder. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Martha confirmed it this afternoon. She's delivered enough babies to know the signs." Ethan was quiet for so long that Clara started to worry. Then she felt wetness on her shoulder and realized he was crying. Silent tears that he made no effort to hide or wipe away. "Ethan?" "I'm terrified," he admitted. "After what happened with Elizabeth, after losing her and the baby both. I'm so scared, Clara." "I'm scared too. But we have Martha and Doc and a whole town who'll help us. This isn't Wyoming. This isn't you alone trying to manage everything. We have support." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "And I'm strong. I'm not Elizabeth. I'm going to be fine." "You can't promise that." "No. But I can promise I'll fight, and I know you'll fight with me. That's all anyone can do." He pulled her close, held her like she was something precious and fragile. "I love you. I don't think I've actually said that out loud yet, but I do. I love you more than I thought I could love anything again." "I love you too. Have for months, even when I was trying not to." Clara felt tears on her own cheeks now. "We're going to be all right. All of us, you, me, this baby. We're going to build a family and a life, and it's going to be messy and hard and wonderful. I believe you." He said it like a vow. "I believe you." The pregnancy wasn't easy. Clara was sick for the first 3 months, exhausted for the next 3, uncomfortable for the final trimester. But Martha was there with remedies and advice. Sarah brought food and companionship, and Ethan hovered like a nervous shadow, ready to help with anything she needed. The children at school were excited about the baby, asking constant questions about when it would arrive and whether it would be a boy or girl. Clara used it as a teaching opportunity, explaining biology and development in terms they could understand. "You're going to keep teaching, aren't you?" one of the older girls asked. "After the baby comes?" "For a while, yes. Maybe not immediately, but once I've recovered." Clara smiled at the concern on their faces. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." "Good, because you're the best teacher we've ever had." It was Jack, the boy who'd been skeptical that first day. He was 15 now, planning to go to university in Helena next year. "You taught me that being smart wasn't something to hide. That's worth everything." Claire had to turn away to hide the tears that threatened. Pregnancy had made her emotional, but this was more than hormones. This was the confirmation that everything she'd built here mattered, that she'd made a real difference. The baby came in early December, during a storm that rivaled the one Clara had arrived in a year and a half earlier. The labor was long and difficult, testing everyone's nerves. Ethan wore a path in the floor with his pacing. Martha barked orders like a general commanding troops. Doc arrived half frozen from his ride across town and immediately took charge. And finally, after hours that felt like days, Clara heard the most beautiful sound in the world, her daughter's first cry. "It's a girl," Martha announced, wrapping the baby in blankets. "Healthy lungs on this one. She's going to be loud." Ethan was at Clara's side immediately, his face wet with tears. "You did it. You're both all right." "We're both all right," Clara confirmed, exhausted but exhilarated. She held out her arms for the baby, and Martha placed the tiny bundle in them carefully. The baby had Ethan's dark hair and Clara's blue eyes, and she was the most perfect thing Clara had ever seen. "Hello, little one. Welcome to Montana." "What are we going to name her?" Ethan asked, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. Clara had been thinking about this for months. "I thought maybe Elizabeth, to honor the family she'll never meet, and Margaret for her middle name, after the woman who helped save us from Harold." Ethan's expression did something complicated. "Elizabeth Margaret Hale. It's perfect." They sat together in their bed, the three of them, while the storm raged outside and the town celebrated the news that the marshal and his wife had a daughter. Clara felt the same contentment she'd experienced that day at the schoolhouse, but deeper now, more solid. This was her family, her life. Everything she'd run toward without knowing it existed. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Elizabeth was indeed loud, demanding attention and testing boundaries from the moment she could crawl. Claire went back to teaching part-time, with Sarah watching the baby during school hours. The town continued to grow, bringing new people and new problems that required creative solutions. But through it all, Claire and Ethan faced everything together. They argued about child-rearing and money and whose turn it was to deal with the latest crisis. They made mistakes and fixed them and made new mistakes. They built a life that was messy and imperfect and absolutely real. 3 years after Elizabeth was born, they had a son, William, named after Clara's father, with Ethan's middle name of James. 2 years after that came another daughter, Anna, after her grandmother. The house expanded to accommodate them all, rooms added on as the family grew. The school became Clara's legacy. She trained other teachers, established a curriculum that was adopted across the territory, created a scholarship fund for students who wanted to attend university. By the time Montana became a state, Hekla's school was considered one of the best in the region. Ethan eventually stepped down as marshal, passing the badge to a younger man who'd been trained under his careful guidance. But he remained a fixture in the town, mediating disputes, offering advice, teaching the next generation what it meant to protect a community. And through it all, their love deepened. It wasn't the passionate romance of storybooks. It was something steadier and more enduring. It was morning coffee before the children woke, stolen kisses in the kitchen, hands held during town meetings. It was choosing each other every day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. On their 10th anniversary, they stood on the porch of their house, larger now, filled with children's laughter and the evidence of a life well lived, and watched the sunset. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked. "Leaving Philadelphia? Everything you gave up to come here?" Clara thought about the woman who'd stepped off that stagecoach 10 years ago. Desperate, alone, running from a life that had crumbled around her. She barely recognized that person now. "I didn't give anything up. I traded one life for a better one. Everything I have now, you, the children, the school, this town, it's all because I made that choice." She leaned into him. "Best decision I ever made. Even though it started as running away?" "Especially because it started as running away. Sometimes you have to run from the wrong things before you can run toward the right ones." She looked up at him. "What about you? Any regrets about sending for a mail-order bride?" "Only that I wasted the first few months trying to keep it practical." He kissed the top of her head. "Should have admitted I was falling in love with you the day you reorganized my filing system and made sense of 10 years of chaos." "You were falling in love with me then?" "Probably. I was definitely intrigued. And a little terrified. You were so determined to fix everything." "I didn't fix everything. I just helped where I could." "You fixed me. Fixed this town. Fixed a lot of broken things just by refusing to accept that broken was permanent." He turned her to face him. "You gave me back hope, Clara. Gave me back the ability to believe in the future. That's not nothing. You gave me the same thing, a place to belong, a reason to build instead of just survive." Clara felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "We built something good here, didn't we? We built something great." From inside the house, they heard Elizabeth calling for them, probably some minor crisis involving William and Anna that required parental intervention. They looked at each other and smiled. "Duty calls," Ethan said. "It always does." Clara took his hand. "But at least we face it together." They walked inside to deal with whatever chaos their children had created, and Clara felt the same certainty she'd felt that first Christmas when Ethan had asked her to dance. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because fate had decreed it or because there were no other options, but because she'd chosen it. Every day, every challenge, every moment, she chose this life, this man, this family. The storm that had brought her to Hekla was long past, but the home they'd built in its wake remained. Strong, enduring, real, and that was everything. Years later, when Elizabeth was preparing to leave for university in Helena, She asked her mother about the early days. Was it hard, coming to a place you'd never been to marry someone you'd never met? Clara thought about it, about the fear and uncertainty, the desperate gamble that had paid off beyond her wildest dreams. It was terrifying, but it was also the first real choice I'd made in my life. Not running from something bad, but running towards something that might be good, and that made all the difference. Do you think you would have been happy if you'd stayed in Philadelphia, if you'd made different choices? I think I would have survived, but surviving isn't the same as living. Out here, in this place that tested me every single day, I learned to really live, to build something meaningful, to love without holding back because I was afraid of loss. Clara looked at her daughter, so much like her, but braver, stronger, with opportunities Clara never had. The frontier doesn't make you soft. It makes you strong enough to risk everything for what matters. Is that why you want me to go to Helena? To risk everything? I want you to go because you've earned it, because you're smart and capable and you deserve every opportunity. But also because I want you to know that wherever you go, whatever you choose, you'll always have a home here. Always have people who love you and believe in you. Clara hugged her daughter tight. Your father and I built this life from nothing. You get to build on a foundation. That's a gift we never had. Elizabeth left for Helena in the fall, and Clara cried watching the stagecoach pull away. But they were good tears, proud tears, the kind that came from watching your child step into a future you'd worked hard to give them. Ethan put his arm around her as the coach disappeared from view. She'll be fine. She's got your stubbornness and my practical sense. Nothing can stop her. I know, but I'm still going to miss her. We have 2 more at home to keep us busy, and the school and each other. He kissed her temple. We're not done building yet, Clara, just starting a new chapter. And he was right. There were always new chapters, new challenges, new opportunities to choose courage over fear. The town kept growing, their family kept evolving, and the life they'd built kept surprising them with its depth and resilience. Some nights, Clara still thought about that storm, about stepping off the stagecoach into a world she didn't understand, facing a future she couldn't predict, about making a choice that seemed desperate at the time but turned out to be the first step toward everything she'd ever wanted. The blizzard had passed years ago, but what it had left behind, this home, this family, this love, remained. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and solid and worth every moment of fear it had taken to find it. Clara Hale had come to Montana to survive. Instead, she'd learned to live. And in the end, that made all the difference.